Chapter 24:19. Bam! 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 General Dragon Subduing continued to attack, using all sorts of divine powers. In just a short span of time, he had actually released more than 3,000 attacks. At the same time, he could also control the blood flame cage to suppress Luo Shui. Luo Shui was forced to retreat and was exhausted from defending. Her power was quickly depleting, and her injuries were getting worse. After a short span of time, her noble divine crown had been shattered, and her long hair was draped over her shoulders. Her ice-blue dress had also become tattered and covered in blood. Dozens of wounds had appeared on her body, and pale golden divine blood kept seeping out. According to the current situation, her divine power would be exhausted in a quarter of an hour at most. By then, she would definitely fall into the hands of General Dragon Subduing, and her life would be controlled by him. The situation was so critical that she could only contend with General Dragon Subduing and try her best to find a chance to escape. Unfortunately, she had used the goddess's tear back then to escape the calamity. General Dragon Subduing was already prepared and did not give her a chance to use the goddess's tear. Thus, she could only think of another way to create an opportunity. Swish! 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 She took out 4 pitch-black swords from her interspatial ring and used the Imperial Kenshin technique to control the swords to attack General Dragon Subduing. Sky-splitting strike. The 4 cold, pitch-black swords all transformed into giant swords that were thousands of feet long and released destructive power. General Dragon Subduing had not taken her attack seriously and could easily resolve it. However, when he saw the appearance of the 4 swords, his pupils constricted, and his eyes were filled with shock. This was because the 4 blades were extremely simple and crude. They weren't real divine weapons. They were parts of the heaven-punishing race's battleship that had been refined and polished into swords. Those are fragments of my race's divine ship. You actually dismantled my race's divine ship. You can even control it. General Dragon Subduing instinctively shouted as he stared at Luo Shui. He knew very well that the divine ship of the heaven-punishing race was very special and was not an ordinary divine artifact. It contained a special power that only the heaven-punishing race could cultivate and use. And now, Luo Shui could also control it. There was only one thought in General Dragon Subduing's mind. Could it be that she has already understood the source of my race's power and learned our cultivation method? This thought caused General Dragon Subduing to be filled with wariness, and he felt a great sense of danger. He knew that the Luo River had assassinated many captains and seized many warships. If she deliberately studied them, she might be able to dig out the secrets of the Heaven Punishers from some of the captains. Just as the Dragon Subduing general was in a daze, for heaven-shattering saber struck him. Bang 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 bang. Amidst the deafening sound, the Dragon Subduing general's protective blood-red light was shattered by the long saber. Blood splattered everywhere. The terrifying impact sent him flying backward, crashing into the blood sea hundreds of miles away. 2 wounds appeared on General Dragon Subduing's burly body. One wound was on his left shoulder, while the other wound was on his right abdomen. Blood gushed out of both wounds. The sharp pain coming from his wound made him sober up a lot, and he also put away his contempt. He hurriedly put away the chaotic thoughts in his head and focused on dealing with Luo Shui. He wanted to capture Luo Shui and interrogate her about the situation. However, when he returned to the peak of the blood-red flames and charged toward Luo Shui, he discovered that she had already disappeared. When he was sent flying by the long saber, Luo Shui had already used her ultimate technique and turned into billions of 5-colored teardrops. Under her control, the 4 long sabers pierced through the blood-red flames and stabbed the blood-red light barrier together. Crack! A huge hole was pierced in the blood-red flame cage that covered the sky. Billions of 5-colored teardrops immediately passed through the gap and escaped the dragon flame domain. Swish, swish, swish. The moment she returned to the world, Luo Shui felt that the pressure on her was greatly reduced. The endless rainbow-colored teardrops scattered all over the world for thousands of miles and disappeared in an instant. The next moment, General Dragon Subduing chased after her. He saw the 5-colored teardrops burrowing into the ground with his own eyes. He did not hesitate to use his ultimate technique to destroy this world. Raging Dragon slays the sky. With a furious roar, he activated the 2 black dragons on his shoulders and released a black dragon phantom that reached the sky. Boom, boom. The 2 black dragon phantoms that were hundreds of miles long slammed into the mountain range and the ground. Instantly, the mountain range that stretched for thousands of miles collapsed, and 2 huge abyss-like pits appeared on the ground. The ground within 5,000 miles turned into ruins, and the mountains and forests no longer existed. Millions of 5-colored teardrops that had just burrowed into the ground were also destroyed. The loud noise shook the sky, and the ground within tens of thousands of miles trembled. In his anger, General Dragon Subduing had destroyed 5,000 miles with one move. Such power was simply terrifying. However, it was useless. The goddess tear that Luo Shui had transformed into had merged into the world. Unless General Dragon Subduing could destroy 10,000 miles with one move, he would not be able to kill Luo Shui on the spot. He had only destroyed 5,000 miles of land and destroyed a portion of the goddess tier. The remaining portion of the goddess tier had already fled this area and was nowhere to be found. General Dragon Subduing stood in the smoke-filled sky and looked at the 2 huge pits on the ground. He was so angry that his face was distorted. Damn you, bitch. You actually managed to escape from my hands once again. I swear that I will not let you escape for the 3rd time. The next time I find you, it will be the time of your death. His thunderous roar reverberated in the sky for a long time. After a while, General Dragon Subduing's anger dissipated. Only then did he break open the sky and teleport away. 3 days later. At the easternmost part of the Luo Shui God Nation, on a nameless island in the endless sky ocean. Luo Shui, who was wearing an ice-blue dress, stood on a reef by the sea. She looked exhausted, and her face was haggard as she looked toward the west. Her eyes were dim and lifeless. At this moment, she looked weak and wretched, and she did not have the noble and majestic aura of the past. Although she had successfully escaped General Dragon Subduing's attack. However, nearly half of the goddess tier that she had transformed into had been destroyed by General Dragon Subduing. As a result, she had been severely injured, and her strength had decreased greatly. She was in an extremely weak state. The Luo Shui God Nation will eventually perish, and no one will be able to save it. However, this failure is only temporary. I will eventually come back to take revenge. Luo Shui looked at the endless sky ocean with a determined gaze as she muttered to herself. Then, she took out 2 communication jade slips from her interspatial ring. After pondering for a moment, she drafted 2 orders and sent them out. Whoosh! Whoosh! The 2 jade slips disappeared into the sky with an ice-blue glow. Luo Shui also turned and left. Her body merged into the blue endless sky ocean and quickly disappeared. 2 days later. The 2 remaining empires of the Luo Shui God Nation announced their surrender at the same time. The Heaven Punishing Army had just conquered the Eastern Wave Empire, the Moon Cauldron Empire, and the Tianwu Empire. They were resting within the borders of these 3 empires. The Heaven Punishing Army's elites were busy conquering various cities, seizing resources, and controlling territories. Originally, they had planned to rest for half a month before conquering the last 2 empires in one go. Who would have thought that the 2 empires would announce their surrender before they could even move south? This saved them a lot of trouble. The Heaven Punishing Army did not need to fight and had already conquered the entire Luo Shui God Nation. Chapter 24:20. In just a few days, news of the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom's destruction spread throughout the entire Shenwu continent. The various races were shocked, and the martial world was in an uproar. This massive war had lasted for an entire year, and it had finally come to an end. Many people had expected that the Luoshui Divine Kingdom would not be able to withstand the attack of the Heaven Punisher and would be destroyed sooner or later. However, when that day finally arrived, the commoners found it hard to accept this result, and their hearts were heavy and sorrowful. All the major powers and races began to worry and be on guard. Which divine kingdom would the Heaven Punisher army's next target be? Or which power or race's territory would it be? For a moment, all the martial artists in the world were discussing this matter, and everyone had different opinions. The situation on the Shinwu continent had also become very anxious, and everyone was jittery. The entire continent was shrouded in a formless haze that made it hard for everyone to breathe. No one knew when the next war would erupt. In the depths of Dark North Mountain, within the gloomy and solemn Dark North Palace, the atmosphere in the main hall was heavy and stifling. The ancestral demon god, who was 6 meters tall and dressed in black robes and had 3 heads, sat on the throne at the head of the hall. More than a month had passed since the great battle between him and Ji Tianqing. He had been heavily injured, and his body was covered in wounds and bloody holes. He looked very miserable. However, after returning to Dark North Mountain, he had recuperated in the Blood Sea Abyss for more than a month before returning to normal. A few days ago, his injuries had healed, and he had appeared to preside over the situation. At this moment, Ling Xian, Ba Tuo, and the 2 new devil sages were all standing in the hall with solemn expressions. The ancestral demon god looked at Ling Xian and asked in a dignified tone, "Ling Xian, I asked you to send a message to Fu Long. When did he agree to come and negotiate?" Ling Xian cupped his fists and bowed, replying respectfully, reporting to the ancestral demon god, Fu Long said that he would arrive today. It should be soon. The ancestral demon god nodded and said angrily, "The Luoshui Divine Kingdom has been taken over by the Heaven Punisher, and there is no news of the Luoshui martial god. The Heaven Punisher's power has increased, and they don't place us in their eyes. If Fu Long's attitude is still arrogant, then I will have to take some necessary measures." Ling Xian hurriedly added, "That's right. The Heaven Punisher race was too arrogant. They wanted to monopolize the Luoshui divine nation and refused to give up any benefits. Such a domineering and overbearing way of doing things would bring them trouble sooner or later. However, primogenitor, you've just recovered to the god realm. If you have a few decades to recover to the LV9 martial god realm, you'll be able to destroy the Heaven Punisher clan easily." Ba Tuo and the 2 new devil saints nodded in agreement. The ancestral fiend celestial felt the same way and said regretfully, "It's a pity that time waits for no one. If I had revived 30 years earlier, the entire 5 elements world would be under my rule." At this moment, a pitch-black battleship that was 3,000 meters long came from the south and stopped above Baiming Palace. After the battleship's door opened, the dragon-subduing general who was clad in golden armor walked out. He stepped into the sky and landed on the square of the Baiming Palace. Then, he walked into the main hall. This time, he came alone and didn't even bring any guards with him. The demon guards guarding the entrance of the hall immediately entered the hall to report the news. "Reporting to primogenitor, General Fu Long has arrived." After reporting the news, the guard bowed and retreated. Then, General Fu Long stepped into the hall and bowed to the ancestral Fiend Celestial. "Lord Fiend Celestial, how have you been?" General Fu Long had a playful smile on his face as he stared at the ancestral Fiend Celestial. He asked, "Lord Fiend Celestial, may I know why you've come to find me?" The ancestral Fiend Celestial frowned and said calmly, "It seems that General Fu Long has just taken down the Luoshui Holy Kingdom. You're in a good mood." General Fu Long nodded and said, "That's right. My clan has been homeless and has experienced many hardships. We've also lost many people. Now, we finally have a place to rest and recuperate on this continent. This is a good thing and a joyous occasion. Of course, I'm happy. Recuperate? The ancestral fiend celestial raised his eyebrows and said playfully, General Fu Long, don't forget that the 10 million soldiers under your command are all human captives. If you continue to fight and kill, you can still maintain your unity. But if you recuperate, the 10 million soldiers will fall apart. When the time comes and you want to gather more soldiers to invade other holy kingdoms, I'm afraid you won't be able to gather so many soldiers. General Fu Long frowned and thought for a while. Then, he smiled and said, if that's the case, Lord Fiend Celestial has come to find me today to discuss the matter of leading the army into battle. That's right. The ancestral Fiend Celestial nodded and said, while the morale of the heaven-conquering army is high, we can join forces to attack the vast divine kingdom. We'll definitely be unstoppable. Before he could finish speaking, General Fu Long waved his hand and rejected him. Lord Fiend Celestial, I've already said it. After a year of fighting, my clan's soldiers are already exhausted and are not suitable to continue fighting. Now, my soldiers are distributing the Luoshui Holy Kingdom's territory, taking in the cities and people, and stabilizing the situation. After the situation is stabilized, the soldiers still have to recuperate and reproduce. My clan has finally obtained the Luoshui Holy Kingdom's territory, so we naturally have to hold on to it tightly and not lose it. Therefore, I've decided to recuperate for 10 years. During this period, I won't lead the army into battle. General Fu Long's reply was obviously out of the ancestral Fiend Celestial's expectations. He instantly frowned and said in a low voice, General Fu Long. If that's the case, you're rejecting my cooperation again. General Fu Long smiled and said, Lord Fiend Celestial, please calm down. I also have to consider the soldiers under my command. The so-called 3 divine kingdoms are actually very weak. The Luoshui Holy Kingdom is the best example. If you lead the army into battle, you'll definitely be able to take down the vast divine kingdom easily. You don't need my cooperation at all. Moreover, after you destroy the vast divine kingdom, you'll be able to monopolize that territory and won't have to share it equally with me. Why not? Seeing the ancestral Fiend Celestial's expression become increasingly gloomy and anger appeared in his eyes, General Fu Long added, if Lord Fiend Celestial really wants to cooperate, we can wait for 10 years. At that time, we'll join forces to attack the Heaven Extinction Divine Kingdom and share that territory equally. How about that? The ancestral Fiend Celestial's face was gloomy. He stood up without saying a word and looked down at General Fu Long from above. His entire body surged with pitch-black demonic aura, emitting an invisible pressure and releasing an ice-cold murderous aura. General Fu Long was enveloped by his pressure and endured the terrifying murderous aura. However, he didn't move at all and his expression didn't change. General Fu Long even said in a playful tone, seems like Lord Fiend Celestial is angry. However, I've already made up my mind and can only say that it's a pity. If you want to make me stay, you'd better give up on that thought. After all, you won't be able to make me stay. You'll only bring disaster to the North Underworld Mountain. Chapter 24-21. General Dragon Subduing's tone and attitude were confident and domineering. As he spoke, he did not care about the ancestor Fiend Celestial's feelings, nor did he care about the demon race. The ancestor Fiend Celestial was instantly enraged. Flames of fury burned in his chest. The pupils of his 6 eyes also burned with fierce blood flames. His black robe fluttered in the wind, emitting a terrifying murderous aura. In an instant, the entire conference hall fell to the freezing point, as if it had been sealed in ice. Ling Xian, Ba Tuo, and the 2 new demon sages were all trembling in fear. They did not even dare to breathe loudly. Only General Dragon Subduing's expression did not change. He stepped through the door and left Beiming Palace. However, the ancestor Fiend Celestial suppressed his anger and watched General Dragon Subduing leave. He did not attack General Dragon Subduing. It was not because he was afraid, but because he did not have full confidence, he did not want to start a war with the Heaven Punisher tribe. After a long time, General Dragon Subduing had already left on the warship. The atmosphere in the conference hall gradually calmed down. The terrifying pressure and killing intent dissipated. Ling Xian, Ba Tuo, and the rest immediately felt the pressure decrease. They secretly heaved a sigh of relief. After a moment of silence, Ling Xian saw the ancestor Fiend Celestial return to his throne. He then asked, "Ancestor, what should we do next?" "The Heaven Punisher tribe wants to stop fighting for 10 years. By then, they will firmly control the territory of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. Their power will definitely increase again. If they do not participate in the war, we will not have a chance to deplete their strength." The ancestor Fiend Celestial nodded and said in a low voice, "Dragon Subduing has guessed our intentions and naturally will not cooperate with us. He wants to stop fighting for 10 years not only to stabilize his territory, plunder resources, and strengthen his power. I'm afraid his strength has reached a bottleneck, and he will need 10 years to break through." Ling Xian was taken aback. He said with admiration, "Ancestor, your observation is so sharp. You can actually see through Dragon Subduing's background. Unbelievable." The ancestor Fiend Celestial waved his hand and said solemnly, "The Heaven Punisher tribe has made it clear that they will not cooperate with us. There is no need to have any hope in the future. Furthermore, in the near future, our race will definitely have a war with the Heaven Punisher tribe. They want to stop fighting for 10 years to expand their power, but we cannot just sit and wait. Only through killing and war can our race quickly grow stronger. War and killing would indeed allow the demon race's power. However, if they lost, they would suffer even greater losses. Only the ancestral devil god would be the biggest winner of the war, and his strength would increase exponentially." Ling Xian looked expectant as he asked, "Primogenitor, do you mean that we should still gather our army and attack the vast divine kingdom?" "Yes." The ancestral demon god nodded slightly and said solemnly, "The Luoshui divine kingdom has already been taken over by the heaven punishing race. Martial god Tianju was still useful, so he would let him live for a few more years. The divine kingdom of Taihao is the best target for our clan to expand." Ling Xian, Ba Tuo, and the others exchanged looks. They were all excited as they bowed to greet him. "Yes, primogenitor. I will go and select the warriors and gather the army." The ancestral devil god said solemnly, "After the defeat 3 years ago, many of our warriors have died, and we have yet to recover. Therefore, they had to go all out in this attack on the vast divine kingdom. They could only win, not lose. The selection of warriors could not be rushed. They had to select the bravest and most skilled warriors. I will give you half a year to prepare. Also, I have to study the situation in the vast divine kingdom and make some arrangements and ambushes in advance." Ling Xian, Ba Tuo, and the others nodded to show that they understood. They bowed and left. Unknowingly, another 3 months had passed. In the 6th level of the Jiutian Tenju Tower, Ji Tianxing had been cultivating in seclusion for 18 years, refining his special divine power. In the first 3 months, he had tried to merge the power of the heaven-mending pearl with his divine power. In the end, he had failed, and failed again. However, after each failure, the rejection between the two types of divine power would lessen. Ji Tianxing was also in the midst of his failures, constantly learning from his experiences and lessons. After 4 months, he finally succeeded. Since then, he had been refining his divine power and cultivating in seclusion without any distractions. He constantly strengthened his divine power and merged the power of the heaven-mending pearl into it. After 18 years of secluded cultivation, that strand of divine power had already become a vast and boundless ocean. Now, all his magic power had transformed into divine power. Moreover, after merging with the power of the heaven-mending pearl, it had become a dazzling golden divine power. This type of divine power was 6 times stronger than ordinary divine power. It also had the aura of holiness and light. Ji Tianqing's divine power naturally carried the aura of a god. It could also dispel the power of darkness and evil. He had taken a big step toward breaking through to the martial god realm. He was very gratified by this stage of success, and his heart was filled with anticipation. However, this was only the first step toward success. Next, he began to refine his divine body. His physical body was the holy sword body, which was the body closest to a divine body. As long as he cultivated the galaxy body refining art and used the power of the stars to refine his body, he would naturally be able to obtain a divine body. Therefore, Ji Tianqing woke up Ji Ku, who was cultivating, and asked her for help. Ji Ku controlled the divine tower and made the star map on the 5th level release endless power of the stars into Ji Tianqing's body. However, Ji Tianqing added some changes and innovations on this foundation. If I only use the power of the stars to refine my divine body, I will only obtain an ordinary divine body that can control the stars and the power of the 5 elements. In that case, I will be no different from an ordinary martial god. I want to merge the power of the divine thunder into my divine body and transform it into the thunder god's body. Also, I want to merge my sword Dao superpower into my divine body and transform it into the heaven-connecting sword body. In his previous life, he was Kenshin. Although he was extremely talented, he eventually became an unparalleled divine king. However, when he broke through to the martial god realm, his divine body was more ordinary. After he ascended to the divine realm, he used all kinds of superpower and secret skills to refine his divine body and transform it into various divine bodies. In the 3,000 mortal worlds, divine bodies were very rare. There might not even be one in each world. However, he knew that there were countless geniuses in the divine realm who had all kinds of rare and special divine bodies. The thunder god's body was one of them. There were also the wind god's body, the indestructible divine body, the fire god's body, and so on. As for the heaven-connecting sword body, it was a unique divine body that he had created by combining his sword Dao. Once he mastered this sword body, he would be like a divine sword with unparalleled destructive power. Even if his divine body was destroyed and crushed into millions of pieces, he would still be indestructible and could reform again. In his previous life, in the divine realm, he had been invincible among those of the same level with the heaven-connecting sword body and sword Dao. Even if he met an opponent of a higher level, he would still be able to put up a fight. In this life, he did not want to go down the same old path. If he tried to refine his divine body after becoming a martial god, he would be one step behind others and there would be innate regrets that he could not make up for. Chapter 24-22. After making up his mind, Ji Tianqing began to cultivate. Actually, this was not a sudden idea that popped up in his head. He had already weighed the pros and cons and made this decision after careful consideration. Moreover, he was 50% sure that this method would work. He first cultivated the galaxy body tempering art, absorbing the endless power of the stars to refine his body. Even if he wanted to innovate and fuse 2 types of divine bodies, the foundation was still the foundation. However, the astral body was the foundation. It had to be condensed and firm enough in order to withstand more tempering and changes. The cultivation process was very dry and painful. Ji Tianqing used the divine fire of the stars to refine his body, enduring inhumane torture at all times. That kind of feeling was like treating oneself as an iron fetus, burning in a raging fire, and then repeatedly hammering and tempering. However, this was the only way to become a god. No one could avoid it. Ji Tianqing had experienced it once when he broke through to the immortal state. Now, he did not feel much pain using the divine fire of the stars to refine his body. He was already used to it. Half a year later, the divine fire of the stars began to show results. Ji Tianqing estimated that he would be able to build a solid foundation and refine the divine body of the stars in 5 years at most. At that time, he would be able to fuse the 5 types of divine lightning and refine the thunder god's body. After refining the thunder god's body, he would then refine the heaven-piercing sword body. Everything would proceed step by step. The east of the Luo Shui divine nation was an endless sea. The sea was vast and mysterious. Even the martial gods could not explore to the end. Therefore, the endless sea was called the Heavenly Sea. From ancient times until now, in the tens of thousands of years of recorded history, the Heavenly Sea had always been synonymous with danger and mystery. Legend had it that the Heavenly Sea was an underwater world that was different from the land. There were all kinds of strange sea creatures hiding there, and their numbers numbered in the hundreds of millions. There were also legends that the depths of the Heavenly Sea were occupied by divine dragons. That was the divine dragons' territory. The divine dragons had set up a seal in the depths of the sea, making it impossible for mortals to enter. There were also many unofficial records that recorded that the deepest part of the Heavenly Sea was connected to the core of the five elements world. The ancient gods all returned to the core of the earth after they died and formed divine fruits that no one had ever seen before. Every time the five elements world suffered a great change and was about to be destroyed, the divine fruit would appear. Those who were fated to obtain the divine fruit would ascend to the heavens and become a deity. There were countless similar myths and legends, and there were all kinds of versions. However, these legends were very illusory. Even a 3-year-old child would not believe them. It was noon and the sun was shining brightly. An icy blue figure was flying through the sky above a blue sea with surging waves. This was the depths of the celestial sea, hundreds of millions of li away from the land. Even a martial god realm expert would have to fly for 3 months without rest to reach the destination. The graceful icy blue figure was a martial god realm expert. Luo Shui martial god. At this moment, her clothes were neat and tidy. Her hair was tied up in a bun and she wore a jade crown. Other than looking a little tired and weak, he didn't seem to have suffered any serious injuries. She was flying over a huge wave that was 1,000 feet tall, and her eyes were fixed on the sea in front of her. At this moment, a black shadow the size of a mountain suddenly rushed out from under the 300-meter-tall wave. Swoosh! In just an instant, the black beast that was as black as ink and as huge as a mountain rushed into the sky and pounced to Luo Shui's side. It was a terrifyingly huge turtle, and its flat shell was at least 10 miles in circumference. However, it was not an ordinary turtle. It actually had 2 black snake-like necks and 5 thick feet under its abdomen. Its entire body was covered in a layer of black water vapor that contained a bone-chilling coldness. Luo Shui was rushing forward when she suddenly saw the huge turtle appear. Not only was she not on guard at all, she even revealed an expression of relief. "Black tortoise, I've finally found you." Her eyes were much brighter as she greeted it with a relaxed tone. As she spoke, her figure flashed and landed on Black Tortoise's back. The black tortoise that was as huge as a mountain was one of the 4 spirits, the black tortoise sacred beast. It carried Luo Shui. Its huge and cumbersome body was as light as a piece of paper as it descended from the sky to the surface of the sea. Swoosh! Black Tortoise broke through the huge wave and swam forward with Luo Shui on its back. Its speed was as fast as an aurora. As it hurried, it used its divine sense to communicate with Luo Shui. "Eldest senior sister, why are you back? It's been 300 years since you last left." Black Tortoise's voice was somewhat dull, revealing an honest and steady aura. However, its tone was rather excited. It was obviously very happy to see Luo Shui. Luo Shui pursed her lips and said with a bitter smile, "Senior sister's divine kingdom is gone and she was even injured by evil people. I could only come back to hide." Black Tortoise's body trembled. It was clearly surprised and exclaimed in disbelief, "It can't be. Eldest senior sister, stop joking. On that continent, who can injure you? Who can destroy your divine kingdom?" Luo Shui said in a low voice, "It's a long story and it's hard to explain. Let's return to Jade Clear Sky first." I want to see Master. Black Tortoise nodded and said, ever since Master went into seclusion, she hasn't appeared for 800 years. Every time she appears, it's with her divine soul clone. However, it's strange that Master seems to have predicted that you would return. As early as 10 days ago, Master came out of seclusion and is now waiting for you in Jade Clear Sky. Then let's go back quickly. Don't let Master wait for too long. Luo Shui's heart moved and she hurriedly urged. Black Tortoise did not say anything else and sped up. After swimming 10,000 miles into the depths of Sky Sea, an incomparably huge vortex appeared in front of them. That vortex was 10,000 miles wide and bottomless, like a terrifying black abyss. At first glance, it would always make people wonder if such a huge vortex had appeared because the five elements world had been pierced through. Although the vortex was unfathomably deep and released a terrifying devouring power. Black Tortoise was used to it and entered the vortex with ease. Swoosh! When it fell into the deepest part of the vortex, it passed through an ice-blue barrier and left Sky Sea. In the next moment, it carried Luo Shui and appeared in an alternate space with bright sunlight and abundant divine power. This beautiful alternate space was like an otherworldly paradise. Beneath their feet was a grassland covered with flowers and plants. In the distance were green mountains and clear waters, and a rainbow hung in the blue sky. The air seemed to be sweet, and 7-colored spiritual clouds floated in the sky. Without a doubt, this was the jade clear sky that Black Tortoise had mentioned. On the huge peak at the end of the grassland, there were several majestic and ancient palaces and golden gates, faintly visible in the clouds. Black Tortoise carried Luo Shui across the grassland and landed on the peak of the huge peak. There were several palaces at the peak of the mountain, and all of them were inhabited by powerful martial artists. Most of them were humans, and there were a few rare foreign races. Of course, these were all disciples of Jade Clear Sky. After landing, Black Tortoise turned into a stout old man in a black robe and guarded outside the palace. Chapter 24-23. The interior of the pure jade palace was richly ornamented and magnificent. Pavilions and towers could be seen everywhere, and the palaces and buildings were elegant and clean, giving off an ancient and mysterious aura. There were very few maids in the palace, but all of them were Tribulation Realm powerhouses. They were dressed in simple but extraordinary silk dresses, and their every movement had a pure spirit that was untainted by the dust of the mortal world. Luo Shui passed through the corridors and gardens, heading towards the depths of the pure jade palace. Along the way, when the maids saw her, they would all respectfully bow and greet her, smiling sweetly as they called her senior apprentice sister. The people of the Shinwu continent only knew that Luo Shui was one of the 3 martial gods and was known as the world's #1 beauty. 3,000 years ago, she had appeared out of nowhere and stirred up a storm on the Shinwu continent as a peerless martial god, vying for supremacy. Even though she was a woman, she was still able to split the world with Taihao and Tianjue, not yielding an inch. No one knew of her past, and no one was clear about her origins. She had always been synonymous with mystery and aloofness. After a while, Luo Shui entered the depths of the pure jade palace and stepped into a magnificent hall that seemed to be made of crystal. The hall was cold and quiet, and there was only a tall woman in an ivory dress sitting on the throne at the head of the hall. The woman had a graceful figure and a graceful and refined temperament. Her eyebrows were picturesque, and she was beautiful and dignified. On the surface, she seemed to be between 30 and 40 years old, and she had the most mature and moving temperament of all. However, the most eye-catching thing about her was her waist-length hair, which was snow-white and pure without a trace of impurities. The white-haired woman leaned on the wide spiritual jade throne, one hand propping up her cheek as she thoughtfully looked at the table in front of her. On the table, which was made from 4 different types of spiritual jade, was a basin-sized pool. The pool was filled with clear blue seawater, and there was a whirlpool in the middle that constantly rippled. At the bottom of the pool, there was also a chopstick-sized ice blue dragon that was leisurely swimming about. Sensing Luo Shui's aura approaching, the white-haired woman collected her thoughts and looked up. When she saw that it was Luo Shui, her expression immediately softened, and a gentle smile appeared in her eyes. Luo Shui, you've finally returned. The white-haired woman slowly got up and sat on the throne, looking at Luo Shui with a kind gaze. Luo Shui also revealed a faint smile and hurriedly came before the throne. He bowed and said, Luo Shui greets Master. Get up quickly. The white-haired woman nodded slightly and said in a concerned tone, ever since you set out to sea, you've only come back a few times in the past 3,000 years. Each time you came back, there was a gap of 700 to 800 years. In the past, when you returned, the Shenwu continent was peaceful, and you only came back to visit your master and your junior brothers and sisters. But this time, you only left for 300 years, and you rushed back. Master's heavenly map is also in chaos. I'm afraid that the situation on Shenwu continent has changed, right? Luo Shui bowed and said, indeed, nothing can be hidden from Master. You have seen through the mysteries of the heavens, and everything is within your expectations. For the past 300 years, the Shenwu continent had been relatively peaceful. However, since 30 years ago, when this disciple began to carry out that plan, it caused many unforeseen events. Over the past 10 years, hundreds of calamities and accidents have occurred one after another. Now, the Shenwu continent has truly changed. The white-haired woman nodded and said earnestly, that plan touched upon an ancient taboo, and it was also an unprecedented heaven-defying act. Even if you had silently planned it for 3,000 years, as soon as you started to carry it out, it would have caused the entire world to shake. The cycle of the heavens is endless. Everything was coincidental, but it was also predestined. The white-haired woman sighed, and there was a hint of desolation in her tone. Luo Shui knew that his master was known as Fairy Jade Clear, and she was the oldest surviving martial god in the world. His master had long since cleared her heart of desires, and she could clearly see the world's affairs. No matter what turmoil or unforeseen events happened in the world, it was nothing to his master. Luo Shui cupped his hands and said calmly, Master, the prosperity and fame of the secular world are nothing to us. However, the world's seal and the limit of 10,000 years are related to our life and death. Even if we don't want to fight or get involved in the struggles of the secular world, we still have to think for ourselves. Thus, this disciple had no choice but to investigate the legends of Goddess Yaoguang and gather all sorts of clues to search for the divine orb. Even if reviving Goddess Yaoguang was a heaven-defying act that touched upon an ancient taboo, this disciple had no choice but to take the risk. Fairy Jade Clear nodded and said earnestly, Of course, I know that you are not only scheming for yourself. I understand your good intentions, so no matter when or why, I will always support you. Tell me, what changes have happened in the Shenwu continent in the past 30 years? Luo Shui calmly explained, 10 years ago, on the Tianxian continent, the ancient demon emperor revived the great demon god from 30,000 years ago with the help of martial god Tianju. Kenshin also reincarnated as Ji Tianxing and married the successor Yunyao, whom this disciple had groomed. Ji Tianxing killed the ancient demon emperor and injured the recently revived ancestral demon god, causing it to escape from the Tianxian continent and come to the Shenwu continent. Luo Shui explained everything that had happened in the past 10 years to Fairy Jade Clear. Fairy Jade Clear listened attentively, and only then did she understand the whole story. After a full quarter of an hour, Luo Shui finally explained everything that had happened in the past 10 years in detail. Fairy Jade Clear's expression became solemn, and she frowned. If that's the case, then the Shenwu continent's situation has indeed become complicated and critical. Originally, you had only used Yunyao to revive the ancient goddess Yaoguang. But you did not expect that the ancestral demon god would be revived, and Kenshin would also be reincarnated. Later on, the Heaven Punisher led an army to invade and occupy your divine kingdom. These were all accidents, but they all happened together by coincidence. Luo Shui nodded and said with a complicated tone, yes, this disciple did not expect things to turn out this way. Now, this disciple can only escape back to Jade Clear Sky and discuss countermeasures with Master. Fairy Jade Clear thought for a moment and said earnestly, the situation is so complicated. If you want to take revenge and continue with the plan from that year, then you can only improve yourself. Only with great strength will you be able to survive in this chaotic war and have the last laugh. Luo Shui nodded and said solemnly, Master's teachings are correct, and this disciple also has the same thoughts. Therefore, this disciple plans to go into seclusion to recuperate for a period of time. After my injuries are healed, I will take out the divine radiant pearl and help Yunyao break through to the deity realm. Only when she breaks through to the deity realm can this disciple's plan be considered complete. Only then can the ancient goddess Yaoguang be truly revived and change the world. Fairy Jade Clear frowned and looked at Luo Shui with a solemn expression. She asked, Luo Shui, from what you said before, Ji Tianqing and Yunyao seem to trust you very much. You know better than I do that once you do that, she will disappear into thin air. Wait until your injuries are healed, then you can go and guide those junior brothers and sisters. Luo Shui cupped his hands and bowed, saying that he had received the order, then bowed and retreated. Time flew by, and the years passed silently. After the Heaven Punisher tribe took over the Luo Shui Divine Kingdom, they quieted down and recuperated. In the North Underworld Mountain, the great demon saints were busy selecting soldiers and generals, selecting the most elite warriors. The situation in Shinwu continent had stabilized, and it was still peaceful for the time being. The pain and haze brought about by the war gradually dissipated. 4 months passed quickly. Within the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda, in the 6th level. Ji Tianqing had been cultivating in seclusion for 16 years, and he had finally tempered his divine body into the body of the Thunder God. However, this was only the second step of tempering his divine body. He rested for a while and then continued to cultivate, tempering his divine body into the heaven-span sword body. At this point, he had already mastered the heaven-span sword intent. Every move he made contained a sword intent that was close to that of a deity. At his level, the sword intent was not just an imposing aura, but a power that could affect the heavens and earth. He had bitterly cultivated the path of the sword spirit, and he had integrated his sword arts into his divine body, persistently tempering his sword body. Although the cultivation process was very painful and difficult, he was not afraid of danger. However, he was not afraid of danger. He cast everything aside and relied on his powerful will to become stronger. Half a year, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, before he knew it, 15 years had passed. He had finally mastered the heaven-span sword body. His divine body had become even taller and sturdier, and his entire body was filled with an incomparably domineering and divine aura. If one looked closely, they would discover that not only had his figure changed, but even his appearance had changed slightly. If one knew the Kenshin, they would discover that Ji Tianqing's current appearance was no different from the Kenshin of the past. Of course, this was only on the surface. The internal changes could not be seen, but they were real. He had condensed a special divine power and a special divine body, and was very close to the martial god realm. Now, his strength and methods had increased several times, and he had become mysterious and powerful. Only the last step is to condense the divine blood. As long as I successfully condense the divine blood, I will completely transform into a martial god. Ji Tianqing murmured to himself, his eyes filled with anticipation. He took out the sword of burial of heaven and entered the sword world in a flash, appearing in the sky above a deep valley. The valley, which was hundreds of miles wide, was sealed by a huge 5-colored light barrier. It was a divine rank formation, shining with 5-colored brilliance and rippling with powerful divine power. Without a doubt, it was the Kenshin's Yang Tomb. Ever since Ji Tianqing discovered the Yang Tomb in the Sword of Burial of Heaven, he had not entered it. First of all, he was not strong enough to open the Yang Tomb. Second, he knew very well what was hidden in the Yang tomb. Therefore, he did not need to open the Yang tomb in advance to check the situation inside. Only now, when he needed something from the Yang tomb, would he open it. A long time ago, the Sword of Burial of Heaven had said. If Ji Tianqing could not open the Yang tomb's sealing formation, he only needed to gather the materials to restore the Burial of Heaven to a divine artifact. Buried Heaven would be able to lend him a helping hand and help him activate the Yang tomb's sealing formation. Now, the Burial of Heaven had been restored to a divine artifact. Ji Tianqing had recovered most of his memories and possessed divine power. He did not need the Sword of Burial of Heaven's help to easily open the formation. Whoosh! Ji Tianqing landed outside the five-colored light barrier and formed a divine seal with both hands, sending rays of dazzling golden light into the light barrier. Immediately, the light barrier in a radius of 300 miles began to ripple, releasing a dazzling brilliance. A moment later, a wide door opened in the light barrier. Ji Tianqing finished his spell and stepped through the door, entering the formation. What appeared in front of him was a ground paved with gray bricks. 1,000 steps away was a mausoleum as large as a mountain, made entirely of black stone. In front of the mausoleum was a black tombstone that was 3,000 meters tall, with 4 large, flamboyant words written on it. It was not Tomb of Kenshin, but Life Towards Death. No one understood why these words were written on the tombstone of the Kenshin tomb. Only Ji Tianqing knew what kind of feelings he had when he carved those 4 words. Chapter 24-25. After a long time, Ji Tianqing finally withdrew his complicated gaze and suppressed the thoughts that filled his mind. He had to put aside his past life and the grudges of the upper realm for the time being. The most important thing now was to retrieve the divine blood sealed in the Yang tomb. Before he died in his past life, Kenshin had already predicted and planned for a drop of divine blood to be sealed in the Yang tomb. It was a drop of Kenshin's blood, the blood of the King of Gods. Although it was only a drop of divine blood, it contained the essence of a lifetime's bloodline. It could shake the heavens, shatter the sun, moon, and stars, and illuminate 3,000 worlds. Complex and vast memories, as well as the supreme inheritance of the path of gods, were all sealed in the divine blood. Apart from Kenshin himself, no one could unseal it. This was the escape route he left behind in his past life. Sometimes, death did not mean the end. Perhaps it was a new beginning. Ji Tianqing raised both of his palms and formed a mysterious hand seal with a profound hand seal. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. The densely packed 5-colored seals fell into the enormous mausoleum like butterflies flying through flowers. The tomb made of black stone did not move at all, and there was no visible change. However, Ji Tianqing's expression did not change, and he continued to cast spells. After 100 breaths of time, he had formed 3,600 seals in succession. Every seal was different. None of them were duplicated, and there was no difference at all. Finally, the huge mausoleum reacted. Hum! In the pitch-black tomb, a 5-colored divine light surged into the sky, covering the sky and the sun. In the middle of the dazzling light, there was a drop of bright golden light, like a small sun, suspended in the air. Ji Tianqing reached out and grabbed, releasing a powerful devouring force. Whoosh! The fist-sized golden light flew out from the dazzling light and fell into his palm. He opened his palm to take a look. Amidst the golden divine light, there was a drop of golden blood. It was round like jade, crystal clear like a gem, condensed and solid, but contained a destructive aura. Ji Tianqing held the drop of golden blood tightly and turned to leave. Swoosh! A moment later, he left the sword world and returned to the 6th level. After putting away the Sword of Burial of Heaven, he began to cultivate and condense the divine blood. The golden drop of blood floated in front of him, shining with a brilliant golden light. He cast a spell and cast a seal, superimposing it on the drop of blood. The drop of blood immediately released strands of golden threads that drilled into his glabella. The strands of golden threads fused into his bloodline and immediately caused a huge change. His blood began to boil and burn with golden flames. It was rapidly shrinking and smelting. This process was extremely painful. It was as if there was a volcano hidden in his body that was about to erupt. However, Ji Tianqing had already cultivated a divine body and was able to suppress the changes in his bloodline and endure the excruciating pain. As time passed, he continued to cast spells. The divine king's blood droplet continued to release golden threads that entered his body and fused with his bloodline. His blood gradually turned from pale gold to dark gold. His blood slowly transformed into God's blood, and his power also increased explosively. Endless memories, as well as the complex and vast inheritance of the divine Tao, merged into his soul. Ji Tianqing was immersed in the transformation, advancing toward the martial god realm. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years passed. One day after 10 years. The gem-like golden blood droplet that floated in front of Ji Tianqing was finally exhausted. At this point, he had completely refined the divine king's blood. The blood in his body had also truly transformed into God's blood. Moreover, it was not the blood of an ordinary martial god, but the God's blood of the king of myriad gods. From then on, Ji Tianqing completed his transformation and broke through to the martial god realm. His strength had increased by leaps and bounds, and his strength had increased by more than 10 times. Moreover, his life force had also reached the immortal realm, and his lifespan had broken through the limit of 10,000 years. The lifespan of an ordinary martial god was 10,000 years. He was different. He had several times longer than an ordinary martial god, reaching 60,000 years. Moreover, he was more noble than an ordinary martial god. There was a suppression from his bloodline rank. His god's blood had a natural suppression effect on all martial gods. That was an insurmountable chasm. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing ended his cultivation and opened his eyes. Immediately, his pupils turned golden and emitted a dazzling golden light like 2 scorching suns. His body also emitted a golden light that shot into the sky and was surrounded by fierce divine flames. A powerful, sacred, and dignified aura naturally spread out. After more than 10 years of waiting and suffering, after experiencing hundreds of hardships and life and death dangers, I finally returned to the divine realm. From now on, no one in this world can stop me. In this life, even the heavenly Tao can't control my life and death. Ji Tianqing slowly stood up, clenched his fists, and roared passionately. His tone was confident and domineering, and there was a hint of anger in it. No one could understand why he said that. Only he knew. At this moment, he had truly awakened. Kenshin had returned. No, the current Ji Tianqing was far more monstrous than Kenshin back then. He was several times stronger. At the same time, in the depths of the distorted spacetime, Ji Ku and Yunyao also ended their cultivation. Previously, the two of them were cultivating in seclusion when they suddenly sensed a powerful fluctuation of divine power and a familiar god's soul aura. Both of them realized that Ji Tianqing might have changed, so they ended their cultivation. Swoosh! Swoosh! After a few breaths, Yunyao and Ji Ku flew over from the left and right and landed beside Ji Tianqing. Both of them looked at Ji Tianqing with concern and asked about the situation. Tianqing. What happened? Brother Tianqing, why do you seem to have changed into a different person? After Ji Ku's reminder, Yunyao noticed the change in Ji Tianqing. Not only had his strength become unfathomable, but his aura was mysterious and majestic. Even his height and appearance had changed. Yunyao was stunned. She showed an expression of disbelief and asked, Tianqing. You can't have broken through to the divine realm, right? Ji Ku also realized this. He immediately widened his eyes and stared at him without blinking as if he wanted to see through him. Seeing the two of them so surprised, Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said with a smile, counting the time, it has been more than 60 years since I started cultivating in seclusion to break through to the divine realm. Now that I've finally succeeded, it's reasonable for me to recover to the martial god realm. After getting a definite answer, Yun Yao and Ji Ku were overwhelmed with shock and cried out involuntarily. Oh my god! You really broke through to the martial god realm? You broke through to the martial god realm from the 9th level martial saint realm in just over 60 years. Such a terrifying speed of advancement is definitely unprecedented. That's great. Brother Tianqing, we've finally come to an end and we can finally take our revenge. Yun Yao and Ji Ku were both shocked and excited. Ji Tianqing was still calm. Other than feeling a little relieved, he was not excited. After all, it was not his first time breaking through to the divine realm. He carefully observed Yun Yao and Ji Ku and realized that both of them were at the limit of the martial saint realm. Chapter 24-26. Ji Tianqing inquired about Yun Yao and Ji Ku's situation. Yun Yao had been stuck at the half-step deity realm for a long time, and she had not been able to break through even after cultivating in seclusion for decades. After all, she had advanced from the tribulation realm to the martial sage realm, and now to the half-step deity realm. She had relied on refining god pearls to increase her strength. Although this method allowed her to increase her strength quickly, the drawbacks were also very obvious. Now that she did not have the help of god pearls, she had to spend a long time polishing and stabilizing her strength before she could break through. As for Ji Ku, her problem was somewhat similar to Yun Yao's. She had also absorbed the demon god's inheritance in a very short period of time and quickly reached the half-step deity realm. Therefore, she also faced the same predicament of lacking stamina and a lack of foundation. After understanding the two's situation, Ji Tianqing deliberated for a moment before making a decision. Ku, what you lack the most right now is strength and foundation. Therefore, you have to stay here and continue to cultivate in seclusion to comprehend the demon god's path. Even if the cultivation process is very boring, you have to persevere. Once you fully comprehend the 9-rotation undying technique, you will be able to break through naturally. After Ji Ku heard this, she nodded seriously and said, Brother Tianqing, don't worry. I will definitely comprehend the deity technique as soon as possible and break through to the deity realm as soon as possible. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and gave her a few words of encouragement. He then said to Yun Yao, Yao, your situation is special. There is not much point in continuing to cultivate in seclusion in the tower. Now, we should leave the tower and explore the outside world. If we can find a god pearl, your problem will be easily solved. Yun Yao nodded and said with a worried expression, I understand, but the Shenwu continent is vast and boundless. We don't have any clues, so how can we find a god pearl? Ji Tianqing smiled and explained, you don't have to worry about this problem. I will send the disciples of Tianzhu Mountain to investigate and find clues about the god pearl. If there is no other way, we will ask Luo Shui. She has been planning for this for many years, so she must have grasped a lot of clues. Perhaps she knows where the divine orb is hidden. Yun Yao thought for a while. Her face softened as she smiled. That's true. We could find those divine pearls because of the clues and help the God Lord had given us. After the discussion, Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao left the celestial pagoda together. Ji Ku remained on the 6th level and continued to comprehend the 9-rotation indestructible mantra. Shua. With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao appeared at the peak of the barren mountain outside the divine pagoda at the same time. It was late at night. What was rare was that the sky, which had been shrouded by gray clouds all year round, was now clear and bright. The night sky was filled with sparkling stars, and a bright full moon hung in the sky, sprinkling down boundless silver light. The cool night breeze blew, blowing Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao's clothes, making them feel comfortable. At this moment, the originally spotless night sky was suddenly filled with violent winds. Shwa, shwa, shwa. The shocking wind broke the silence between heaven and earth, blowing tens of thousands of miles of mountains and rivers. Even the stars and moon in the night sky shone with dazzling brilliance, becoming more than 10 times brighter. Shwa. In the next moment, endless starlight poured down from the sky like the water of the Milky Way, releasing the most dazzling starlight. Sacred golden light also gushed out from under the ground, as if billions of golden lotuses had left the ground and flew into the night sky. The sudden phenomenon of heaven and earth caused Yunyao to be stunned. She revealed an expression of disbelief. Ji Tianqing seemed to have expected this. He just kept smiling and was not surprised. Soon, the magnificent phenomenon of the heavens and earth changed again. The water of the Milky Way that fell from the sky condensed into 9 dragon shadows that were tens of thousands of miles long, circling and soaring in the night sky. Endless golden lotuses gushed out from the ground and floated in the night sky like lanterns, intertwining with each other to form mysterious patterns. With Ji Tianqing and Yunyao as the center, the area within hundreds of thousands of miles was enveloped by the sacred light, as if it was a divine kingdom. Such a powerful phenomenon could be seen clearly from tens of thousands of miles away. Even the entire ruins of God could see it clearly. The person who caused such a change in the weather was Ji Tianqing. After a long time, Yunyao withdrew her amazed gaze and turned to Ji Tianqing beside her. She was a little emotional and asked with a burning gaze, "Tianqing, this is the phenomenon of heaven and earth caused by your breakthrough to the martial god realm, right?" Ji Tianqing nodded with a smile and explained, "That's right. Although I've broken through to the martial god realm for some time, I was in the divine pagoda before, and the divine pagoda blocked the detection of the heavenly Tao. Now that I've left the divine pagoda and returned to the 5 elements world, the phenomenon of heaven and earth is late." After receiving his confirmation, Yunyao understood the reason and said with emotion, "Billions of stars moved for you, releasing starlight that filled the sky and forming 9 star dragon shadows. Even the ground surged out billions of golden lotuses and bloomed between heaven and earth." Such a strange and brilliant phenomenon of heaven and earth is truly unimaginable. It has never been seen before. Tianqing, does this mean that you are the most unique martial god in this world? Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and nodded with a smile. Perhaps. At least, I'm Ji Tianqing and not Kenshin. Yunyao held his arm and smiled as she looked at the sky full of golden lotuses and 9 dragon shadows. Her eyes were filled with happiness and anticipation. At the same time, in the depths of sky sea, jade pure heaven. The door to a secret chamber deep in jade pure palace slowly opened. Ka ka ka, after the heavy stone door opened, a graceful ice blue figure walked out. This person was Luo Shui. Her expression and aura had returned to their usual noble and cold state, and her eyes were as deep as the starry sky. She stepped through the passage and arrived at the main hall of Jade Pure Palace. In the cold and quiet main hall, the hall was filled with bright and dazzling lights. Fairy Yuqing, who was dressed in an ivory dress and had white hair that reached the ground, was leaning on the throne and taking a nap. She slowly opened her eyes when she heard footsteps. She did not need to turn her head to know that it was Luo Shui. Luo Shui walked to the front of the throne and bowed. Disciple greets master. Jade Pure Fairy slowly turned to look at her and asked with a kind expression, Luo Shui, have your injuries healed? Luo Shui cupped her hands and replied, Master, disciple has been recuperating for several months. My injuries have healed and are no longer a problem. Jade Pure Fairy nodded and said calmly, since that's the case, stay in Jade Pure Heaven for a few more days and go see your junior brothers and sisters. However, Luo Shui shook her head. Master, there's no need for that. The current situation in Xinwu continent is unpredictable. Every day that we delay will add another variable to the situation. Disciple is here to bid farewell to you. Bid farewell? Jade Pure Fairy frowned and asked doubtfully, "You're preparing to leave today? Where do you plan to go? What are you going to do?" Luo Shui was silent for a moment before replying solemnly, "Naturally, I'm going to the ruins of God to take back what I should have obtained 3,000 years ago." Chapter 24-27. Luo Shui's words caused the atmosphere in the hall to become solemn. Fairy Yuqing was silent and slowly sat up. She looked at Luo Shui with a dignified gaze and said in a low voice, "I understand your nature. It seems that you have made all the preparations." Luo Shui was not afraid at all. He looked at her firmly and nodded, "Yes." Fairy Yuqing asked, "You have to know that it is an ancient taboo. You and I are not qualified to touch the realm and power. If the plan fails, you will be reduced to ashes. If it is light, you might lose yourself and your soul will be destroyed. Even so, you can accept it calmly." Luo Shui answered without hesitation, "Master, you know that I have no other choice. This world was truly too rotten. Only by picking up the ancient taboo and reproducing the light of the goddess can we change the world." Fairy Yuqing nodded slightly and said earnestly, "I have long guessed that you would think so. Therefore, I have already made preparations and arranged for the funeral. I will go with you." Luo Shui frowned and shook his head, "Master, why do you have to do this? I have already made preparations. You don't have to take the risk." He. Fairy Yuqing stood up and sneered self-deprecatingly, "Thousands of years ago, when I was unhindered in the world, I was called a fairy. But fairies are immortal and retain their youth forever. Who has ever seen a white-haired fairy like me, who looks like an old fairy? I only have less than 2,000 years left in my 10,000-year lifespan. Even if I stay in Jade Clear Heaven, I can only wait year after year for death to come. Life has long lost its meaning." At this point, Fairy Yuqing restrained her self-deprecating smile and said calmly, "Moreover, you are not a match for Old Man God Ruins. If I don't send you off, I'm afraid you won't be able to enter." Luo Shui pursed his lips and considered carefully for a moment before nodding, "In that case, I thank Master." "Master, don't worry. As long as my plan succeeds, I can change the world and obtain the mystery of ascension. At that time, you will no longer have to be trapped in Jade Clear Heaven and can leave this world." Fairy Yuqing nodded slightly and raised her sleeve to brush the blue pool on the table. Immediately, an azure light surged out of the small pool and condensed into an oval light door that was more than 10 feet tall in front of her. "Let's go." As she spoke, Fairy Yuqing stepped into the icy blue light door. Luo Shui quickly nodded and stepped into the light door. Whoosh! In the next moment, the icy blue light door, and Fairy Yuqing and Luo Shui disappeared. With a flash of light, the two of them appeared outside the jade clear sky, in the boundless sky sea. Moreover, it was in the bottomless, pitch-black whirlpool that was 10,000 miles in radius. The two of them stood in the dark space, surrounded by rapidly surging walls of whirlpools of water. Below his feet was the end of the vortex, the endless darkness. Even though the vortex released a terrifying suction force, the two of them stood at the bottom of the vortex and endured the most powerful suppression. However, the two of them remained unmoved, as steady as a mountain. Luo Shui looked up at the sky above the vortex and transmitted a message to Fairy Yuqing. "Master, it will take at least a month to return to the Shenwu continent from here. Don't you have a boundless flying ship? We should be able to travel faster with that divine artifact, right?" Fairy Yuqing had no intention of taking out the flying ship. She looked down at the darkness at the bottom of the vortex and said faintly, "Luo Shui, ever since you can remember, didn't you always ask me where this sea leads to?" Luo Shui was stunned for a moment and chuckled, "Master, why do you remember those old memories? Everyone knows that the heavenly sea is the most mysterious and unfathomable forbidden area. It is even more mysterious and dangerous than the ruins of God. This sea is just a relatively large vortex. It most likely leads to the underground and allows the seawater to flow to other sea areas. Fairy Yuqing looked at her with a deep gaze and shook her head gently. She said solemnly, "No, it's not. This sea is actually the end of the world." The end of the world. Luo Shui was stunned and said with a stunned expression, "Master, the entire world is a huge star. The star is round, so how can there be an end?" Fairy Yuqing shook her head again and said, "It's not the kind of end you think, but the ruins of God." What? Luo Shui's eyes widened, revealing an expression of disbelief. The bottom of this sea is actually connected to the ruins of God. How is this possible? The ruins of God is in the north of the Shinwu continent, and this place is tens of millions of kilometers away from the Shinwu continent. Could it be that there is a space-time passage under the sea? Fairy Yuqing nodded and explained calmly, "For thousands of years, I have entered the sea to explore the end of the vortex and where it leads to. But I failed every time, and the injuries I suffered each time were more serious than the last. As a result, I gradually gave up on investigating and strictly ordered you not to explore so as to avoid losing your lives." "I see." Luo Shui revealed an expression of sudden realization and nodded, "No wonder you clearly wrote in the sect rules that you are not allowed to enter the bottom of the sea. However, Master, you failed every time you explored the sea. How did you know that this place leads to the ruins of God?" Fairy Yuqing explained with an indifferent expression, "Half a year ago, before you returned, I entered seclusion. After my seclusion, I have mastered a divine ability, but I have yet to break through to the next realm. I've already lived for 8,000 years, so I've long grown tired of living. If I could not ascend, there was no point in continuing to live. Therefore, I entered the sea with my last glimmer of hope. In the end, I relied on that divine ability and secret technique to successfully pass through the divine power restriction and enter the space-time passage." At this point, the corners of Fairy Yuqing's mouth curled into a self-deprecating smile and said, "I originally thought that the end of the space-time passage would lead to the deepest part of the ground. Perhaps I would discover the greatest secret of this world, or obtain a peerless divine item in the Earth's core, such as the legendary divine fruit, but I did not expect to arrive at the ruins of God in the blink of an eye. Ha ha ha. Everyone says that the ruins of God and the Sky Sea are the two most mysterious and dangerous forbidden areas. In fact, the Sky Sea is even above the ruins of God. But I now understand that the ruins of God is the most mysterious forbidden area. If the five elements world is extraordinary and there is really some heaven-shaking mystery, then it must be in the ruins of God." Luo Shui thought for a moment and nodded with a smile, "That is indeed the case. For example, the cemetery of the gods guarded by the old man of the ruins of God is the world's greatest secret." Fairy Yuqing nodded slightly and did not say anything more. She raised her hands with a solemn expression and formed a mysterious divine art. She absorbed the power of the Sky Sea and condensed a faint golden light barrier to protect her and Luo Shui. Then, she brought Luo Shui down and quickly disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the sea. Chapter 24-28. In the depths of the ruins of God. On the vast land, there were endless mountain ranges. The sky was always overcast and covered by thick gray clouds. There was not much greenery in the mountains and rivers. All that could be seen was a scene of desolation and decay. At this moment, in a dark and deep valley, a dazzling icy blue light suddenly shone from the ground. Swoosh! With a flash of light, two graceful figures emerged from the ground. These two women were Fairy Yuqing and Luo Shui. The two of them stood in the night sky and looked around. Fairy Yuqing looked around and her gaze fell on the night sky in the north. She pointed to the night sky hundreds of miles away and said calmly, "We're here." Luo Shui looked in the direction she was pointing and saw a silver-white full moon floating in the night sky 500 miles away. Upon closer inspection, one would find that it was not a real full moon. It was a jade-colored stone platform that was as big as a mountain. Luo Shui nodded and muttered in a low voice, "That's the ancient viewing platform. This place is not far from the entrance of the cemetery of the gods." Fairy Yuqing remained silent. She secretly released her divine sense and spread it in all directions. Immediately, a radius of 10,000 miles was enveloped by her divine sense. Her soul consciousness was very meticulous. Even the slightest abnormality in heaven and earth couldn't escape her notice. After a few breaths, Fairy Yuqing found her target and said in a deep voice, "Follow me." She brought Luo Shui and flew through the night sky, flying 8,000 miles towards the northwest before stopping at the peak of a mountain that was 10,000 feet high. Swoosh! 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 She formed hand seals with both hands and sent out thousands of strands of five-colored divine light into the mountain peak under her feet. Immediately, thousands of strands of divine power drilled into the ground, causing a subtle change. Luo Shui knew that Fairy Yuqing understood the ruins of God better than her, so she stood at the side and watched quietly. After about 10 breaths of time, Fairy Yuqing suddenly stopped. Luo Shui looked at the mountain peak under her feet. There did not seem to be any changes and she could not help but frown. At this moment, Fairy Yuqing looked at the night sky with a burning gaze and said in a playful tone, "Old ghost, since you've already woken up, why don't you show yourself?" As her voice fell, a figure gradually appeared in the night sky thousands of feet away. It was a tall and sturdy figure, wearing a wide black robe. His body was translucent, and it was hard to tell if he was real or not. Judging from his physique, he was a 2-meter tall man. His body was covered by a black robe, and his face was covered by a cloak, making it impossible to see his true appearance. Only a pair of large, yellowed palms could be seen from the wide sleeves of his robe. His skin was as old as the bark of an ancient tree. Evidently, this black-robed man was an old man. It was none other than the guardian of the ancient ruins of God. He stood quietly in the night sky, but no one could sense his divine power or soul aura. It was as if he had become one with the world. He stared at Fairy Yuqing on the mountain peak and said in a low voice, "Old witch, I haven't seen you for 3,000 years. I didn't expect you to still be alive. This old man told you long ago not to have any ideas about the cemetery of the gods. Why did you come again?" Without a doubt, Old Man Godly Ruins and Fairy Yuqing were old acquaintances. After all, the two of them were the oldest martial god experts in the world. Fairy Yuqing chuckled and said in a mocking tone, "Old man, you're not dead yet. How can this old woman walk in front of you? Since you already know why I'm here, there's no need for me to waste my breath on you. Tell me, how can I enter the cemetery of the gods?" Old Man Godly Ruins said in a low and cold voice, "Only I can open the entrance to the cemetery of the gods. No matter how strong the others are, it's useless." Fairy Yuqing nodded and said with a playful smile, "In that case, this old woman only needs to defeat you, right?" Old Man Godly Ruins still did not move and did not have much of a reaction. He neither refuted nor agreed. Looking at Luo Shui who was beside Fairy Yuqing, he asked, "Old witch, why did you bring Luo Shui here?" Fairy Yuqing chuckled and said, "She's the one who wants to enter the cemetery of the gods. I'm just accompanying her." Old Man Godly Ruins was silent for a moment, and said with anger in his voice, "Old witch, do you want me to break the rules? Every peerless genius who hasn't become a god has a chance to enter the cemetery of the gods and perhaps obtain the inheritance of an ancient god. 3,000 years ago, before Luo Shui became a god, she entered the cemetery of the gods once. However, she didn't obtain any inheritance. Now that she's already a martial god, what's the use of entering the cemetery of the gods again?" This time, without waiting for Fairy Yuqing to answer, Luo Shui took a step forward and stepped forward. She bowed to Old Man Godly Ruins and explained, "Senior, it's not that I didn't obtain any inheritance when I entered the cemetery of the gods 3,000 years ago. It's just that what I obtained involves an ancient taboo and is of great importance. With my strength and methods back then, it's impossible for me to succeed. That's why I endured until now and came back to take back what I obtained back then. Luo Shui's words clearly stunned Old Man Godly Ruins. Ancient taboo. Obtained back then? After a moment of silence, Old Man Godly Ruins asked in a serious tone, could it be that the ancient taboo you're talking about is Goddess Yaoguang? Yes. Luo Shui nodded solemnly. That's impossible. Old Man Godly Ruins subconsciously shook his head, unable to accept this result. Luo Shui, this old man is very clear about your background and bloodline talent. Even if you go back 10 generations, you have no connection with Goddess Yaoguang. Fairy Yuqing immediately frowned and revealed a displeased expression. She shouted in a deep voice, Old Ghost, what nonsense are you talking about? Goddess Yaoguang is the holy mother of the human race. All humans in the world can be said to be her descendants. How can there be no connection at all? Moreover, the inheritance of the divine Tao is about opportunity and talent. What does it have to do with bloodline? Old Man Godly Ruins still refused to believe it and said, that's just an ordinary god. How can an ancient goddess like Yaoguang? Fairy Yuqing couldn't be bothered to listen to him and shouted with a cold expression, cut the crap. This old one will fight with you now and see if you've improved in the past few thousand years. Old Man Godly Ruins sighed faintly. Old witch, this is meaningless. Even if she enters the graveyard of the gods, she will return empty-handed. Fairy Yuqing was stubborn and sneered. As long as she can enter the graveyard of the gods, whether or not she can take back Goddess Yaoguang's inheritance is her business. After saying that, she formed a seal with both hands. Her left hand moved and her right hand formed a sword finger and pointed at Old Man Godly Ruins. Old Ghost, take this, Void Transformation Divine Palm. Following Fairy Yuqing's cold shout, a giant palm the size of a mountain suddenly appeared in the night sky. It contained 30,000 miles of heaven and earth power and fiercely slammed down. No progress at all. Old Man Godly Ruins shouted indifferently. He raised his wide robe sleeve and punched at the 5-colored giant palm. Kaboom! The fist and palm collided and exploded with an earth-shaking boom. Instantly, hundreds of miles of the night sky was shattered into pieces and turned into void. Chapter 24-29. The battle between the martial god realm experts was utterly destructive. Even if it was just the aftermath of the battle, it could destroy everything within a radius of 10,000 miles. Those below the martial god realm were not even qualified to watch the battle. Fairy Yuqing flew high into the sky and waved her palms repeatedly, sending out 5-colored divine light that covered the sky and earth. Old Man Godly Ruins stood in the sky, his sleeves fluttering as his palms activated the vast power of heaven and earth to fight with her. The two peerless powerhouses were the oldest martial gods in the world and also the strongest powerhouses with the deepest strength and foundation. The two of them had the power to split mountains and rivers and destroy heaven and earth with every move they made. All kinds of divine abilities and secret techniques were at their fingertips, and there were no repetitions even after hundreds of moves. However, after the two of them exchanged 300 moves, the area within a radius of 30,000 miles was razed to the ground. The rolling mountain range had turned into ruins, and the sky was covered by endless smoke and dust. Only the ancient and mysterious ancient viewing platform was floating alone in the sky, undamaged. Seeing this scene, Fairy Yuqing and Old Man Godly Ruins temporarily stopped fighting. Fairy Yuqing glanced at the ruins under her feet and said to Old Man Godly Ruins, "Old man, we have to change places, or your nest will be destroyed." Old Man Godly Ruins sneered confidently, "What a joke. The place where I live is the cemetery of the gods. Who can destroy it?" Although he said so, he still waved his palm and tore open the sky, opening a wide void crack. Swoosh! With a flash, he stepped into the void crack and entered the endless darkness. Fairy Yuqing followed closely behind and entered the void. The two of them faced each other in the endless darkness. After accumulating their aura and divine power, they began to fight again. Luo Shui did not stay in the godly ruins. She also passed through the void crack and came to the void to watch the battle. She knew very well that there was no enmity between her master and old man godly ruins. Instead, they sympathized with each other and appreciated each other. Although the two of them were fighting, it was just a spar. Therefore, she was not worried about Fairy Yuqing's safety at all, and would never interfere in this battle. Time passed silently. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. Old Man Godly Ruins and Fairy Yuqing had exchanged tens of thousands of moves in the void. The two of them performed all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills over and over again. The situation gradually became clear. The old man of the divine ruins was clearly inferior. His entire body was covered in wounds, and he was in a sorry state. On the other hand, apart from her messy hair bun and a few wounds on her body, Fairy Yuqing did not show any signs of defeat. However, it was still very difficult for Fairy Yuqing to defeat Old Man God. At the very least, it was impossible to do so in the short term. Seeing that the two of them were still fighting back and forth, Luo Shui opened his mouth and said, "Senior, you and Master are old acquaintances. Although you are not friends, you are closer than friends. In this spar, the two of you should stop when it's appropriate. You must not be injured because of this and harm the harmony. Moreover, I'm entering the graveyard of the gods this time not only for myself, but also for this world and all the martial gods, martial saints, and martial artists." Heaven and earth had already decayed, and this world was also filthy and chaotic. Only the appearance of an unimaginable ancient power could break the seal of the world. For the sake of the world, for the well-being of the common people, for the sake of all martial artists to seek the path of ascension. Senior, this junior is begging you, for the sake of the common people and martial artists of the world, please think more. Luo Shui's expression was solemn and his tone was sincere. When Old Man God heard this, he was indeed moved and his attack slowed down. On the other side, Fairy Yuqing noticed that he was hesitating and said with a frown, "Old ghost, don't be so wishy-washy. If you want to fight, then fight to your heart's content. I've long had nothing left to live for. Even if I die here, I have no regrets. Just attack with all your strength. I don't need you to deliberately give in. That would be a humiliation to me." A martial god expert had the dignity and decency of a martial god expert. Especially a peerless expert like Fairy Yuqing who had dominated an era, she had even more pride and ambition. Old Man God was silent and did not respond to Luo Shui and Fairy Yuqing's words. However, he was clearly much more serious. He used all his strength to use his divine abilities and secret techniques to fight with Fairy Yuqing. The battle between the two became even more intense. Loud sounds rang out continuously in the void as five-colored divine light burst out in all directions. Luo Shui secretly frowned and muttered to himself, "Sigh. Master's temper is really too stubborn. Senior's heart has already softened. Why bother to provoke him?" Unknowingly, 24 hours had passed. Fairy Yuqing and Old Man God Ruins had fought for an entire day. They had consumed 60 to 70% of their divine power and were much weaker. Moreover, Old Man God Ruins' injuries were even more serious. Not only was his black robe tattered and ragged. Even the cloak he was wearing had a few holes in it, vaguely revealing an old and dignified face and a wisp of white beard. His injuries were slightly more serious. There were traces of blood left in his mouth and nose, and there were deep wounds on his chest and back. Fairy Yuqing was also heavily injured and looked rather wretched. However, in comparison, her injuries were slightly lighter. At this point, the outcome of the battle was about to be revealed. Both of them used all their strength and used their strongest killing moves to begin the battle. Ancient Time Rush, Space-Time Tide. Old Man God Ruins waved his palms and struck out a dazzling white light that covered the sky and earth. It superimposed into a monstrous wave that slammed towards Fairy Yuqing. That mysterious dazzling light contained the power of time and space. In the dazzling white wave, the sun and moon alternated and the scene of the vicissitudes of time could be vaguely seen. Fairy Yuqing was not to be outdone. She gritted her teeth and raised her palms, slamming them towards Old Man God Ruins. 1,000 evolutions of the great Tao, one in heaven and earth. Vast and mighty five-colored divine light spewed out from her seemingly weak palms, forming 5 pillars of light that penetrated the heavens and earth. They contained an incomparably powerful divine power of heaven and earth. Boom! 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 In the next moment, the 5 pillars of divine power slammed into the space-time wave, causing a loud explosion that shook the heavens. Although it was difficult to transmit sound in the void. However, the destructive shockwaves brought about terrifying vibrations that caused the surrounding space to become chaotic. Luo Shui, who was watching the battle from 1,000 miles away, was pushed back 100 miles by the shock wave, her face pale. She revealed a look of surprise and couldn't help but exclaim, "This is the true strength of Old Man God Ruins and Master. It's actually so terrifying." Although Master is only at the 8th level of the martial god realm, the divine power she used just now can only be used by a 9th level martial god, right? While feeling surprised, Luo Shui stared intently at the void. Her gaze pierced through the endless 5-colored dazzling light, searching for the figures of Fairy Yuqing and Old Man God Ruins. After a long time, when the 5-colored dazzling light gradually dissipated and the void slowly returned to normal, she finally saw the appearance of the 2 peerless experts. Fairy Yuqing's clothes were ragged and her hair was disheveled as she stood in the void. She was bent over and coughing. 300 miles away, Old Man God Ruins in a black robe stood quietly in the void. Chapter 2430. Seeing this scene, Luo Shui was stunned. Master and Senior Ruins, who won? On the surface, Old Man God's reaction was very calm, and Fairy Yuqing's injuries seemed to be more serious. But Luo Shui felt that the result should not be like this. As expected. A moment later, Fairy Yuqing raised her sleeve to wipe the blood off her face and spoke. She looked at Old Man God with a complicated expression and transmitted her voice, "Old Ghost, it seems that I have won this battle. However, I won very unhappily. Why did you hold back? Let me tell you, even if you go all out, I can still defeat you fair and square." Old Man God stood quietly in the void, his figure flickering. He looked at Fairy Yuqing calmly and said in a low voice, "No, you have indeed won. It's not that I deliberately gave in, but that you are indeed stronger. Defeating me has been your long-cherished wish for 5,000 years. Now that your wish has been fulfilled, I want to congratulate you. You should be happy." Fairy Yuqing's face was filled with anger as she pretended to be fierce and shouted coldly, "Old thing, don't play this game with me. Don't think that I will forgive you just because you gave in like this. Don't even think about it. It's impossible in this lifetime." Luo Shui, who was thousands of miles away, could not help but frown when she heard the conversation between her master and Old Man God. Strange, what's wrong with Master? Could it be that there is some grudge between her and Senior Ruins? That's not right. Judging from Master's expression and tone, it doesn't seem like she has any enmity with Senior Ruins, but more like. Of course, women understood women the best. Luo Shui could see that Fairy Yuqing's expression and reaction were clearly a little strange. But this was a matter between the elders, so she could not ask. At this time, Old Man God said calmly, "Don't waste time, I admit defeat and will now open the cemetery of the gods for Luo Shui." With that, Old Man God stepped through the void and returned to the 5 elements world. Luo Shui hurriedly flew to Fairy Yuqing's side and helped her leave the void. Although Fairy Yuqing had won, it was not easy and she had also suffered heavy injuries. An apologetic expression appeared on Luo Shui's face as he blamed himself. "Master, this disciple has implicated you and caused you to be heavily injured." Fairy Yuqing waved her hand and said kindly, "The old man's strength and means are actually above mine. If I don't pay this price, how can I win you the chance to enter the graveyard of the gods? This kind of injury is nothing to me. I'll be fine after a few decades of recuperation." As they spoke, the two of them left the void and returned to the ruins of God. Old Man Godly Ruins was standing in the air above the ruins, looking down at the huge pit below. He took out a mysterious stone the size of a palm from his interspatial ring and formed a seal with his right hand. The stone was pitch black, and its surface was mottled with vicissitudes. It was obviously an ancient relic, and it emitted a cold aura of death. Luo Shui noticed this and was just about to observe the black stone. Old Man Godly Ruins had already finished casting his spell and put away the black stone. Shwa! In the huge pit in the ruins, a black door of light appeared out of thin air, exuding an ancient and vigorous aura. Old Man Godly Ruins stood by the door and turned his head to look at Luo Shui. He said calmly, "Luo Shui, go in." Luo Shui flew to his side and bowed respectfully. "Thank you for your help, Senior. I'll remember this for the rest of my life." After bowing, she turned to look at Fairy Yuqing. Fairy Yuqing took out a walnut-sized, sparkling and translucent white ball of light from her interspatial ring and handed it to Luo Shui. "Luo Shui, take this divine light pearl and you'll have hope of entering the tomb of the goddess and getting what you want. Remember, if you can't do it, don't force it." Luo Shui nodded solemnly and said in a low voice, "Don't worry, Master. I know what's important." With that, she held the divine light pearl with both hands and turned to step into the door of light. Shwa! With a flash, the black door of light dissipated, and Luo Shui's figure also disappeared. Old Man Godly Ruins and Fairy Yuqing retracted their gazes and looked at each other in silence. After a long time, Old Man Godly Ruins asked, "According to ancient legends, this world was sealed by the gods of the upper realm and was abandoned by them. But you found out that the person who sealed this world was Goddess Yaoguang. So, you did everything you could to investigate the legend of the goddess and collect the divine light pearl. You want to use the divine light pearl to revive Goddess Yaoguang and unlock the seal of this world?" Fairy Yuqing frowned as a look of surprise flashed in her eyes. She narrowed her eyes and said in a low voice, "Old ghost, although I didn't intend to hide it from you, you guessed our intentions with just a few words. It's indeed unbelievable. However, your guess isn't entirely correct. The person who came up with this idea and made this plan wasn't me, but Luo Shui." Old Man Godly Ruins said in a serious tone, "You're playing with fire. The slightest mistake and you'll be smashed to pieces." Fairy Yuqing smiled and said indifferently, "That's right, we're indeed walking on the edge of death. If we're not careful, we'll fall into the abyss and be consigned to eternal damnation. But if we don't do this, if we don't try and struggle, what can we do? Accept our fate? Wait for the 10,000 years to pass and turn into bones and sand?" Old Man Godly Ruins fell silent and didn't say anything else. Fairy Yuqing also calmed down and said in a gentle tone, "Old ghost, your injuries are very serious. Go and recuperate." Old Man Godly Ruins nodded and said, "This trip to Luo Shui will take at least 10 days to half a month, and at most half a year to a year. You don't have to wait here, go and recuperate. You don't have to worry." Fairy Yuqing rolled her eyes at him and turned to leave. In the blink of an eye, Fairy Yuqing disappeared at the end of the ruins. However, she didn't go far. She hid in the ruins of God and found a secluded place to recuperate. Old Man Godly Ruins stood in place for a moment and sighed silently before his figure gradually disappeared. At the same time, Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao were riding on the glazed fire dragon and flying thousands of feet high in the sky. The two of them had left the divine pagoda for 5 days and had now flown out of the ruins of God and were rushing to the Luo Shui divine kingdom. 100,000 miles ahead was the border of the Luo Shui divine kingdom. Ji Tianqing stood on the back of the dragon and looked ahead with a solemn expression. Yun Yao stood side by side with him and said with a worried expression, "When we were cultivating in seclusion, the heaven-conquering army had already occupied half of the Luo Shui divine kingdom. Now that several months have passed, I wonder how the battle is going. Can the Luo Shui divine kingdom still hold on?" Ji Tianqing shook his head and said in a low voice, "The building is about to collapse, and a single tree can't support it. With Luo Shui alone, she definitely can't protect the Luo Shui divine kingdom. Moreover, I sent 2 messages to Luo Shui. But 2 days have passed and she still hasn't replied to me. I don't know what happened to her." Chapter 24:31. The Divine Master is powerful. Even if the Holy Kingdom is destroyed, she will be fine. Luo Shui said solemnly. He was comforting Ji Tianqing and himself. Ji Tianqing thought for a while and said, "When we reach the border of the Luo Shui Holy Kingdom, let's stop for a while. Let me sneak into the city and find out more about the situation before we make a decision." Luo Shui nodded in agreement. That's how it should be. We have been in seclusion in the Holy Pagoda and have lost contact with the outside world. We don't know what has happened in the past 6 months. Now that we can't contact the Divine Master, we can only do this. 6 hours later, the Glaze Fire Dragon flew 100,000 miles and arrived at the border of the Luo Shui Holy Kingdom. Ji Tianqing found a main city and snuck in alone to find out more information. Yun Yao and the Glaze Fire Dragon stayed 500 miles away from the city and waited patiently. The war had ended and the border of the Holy Kingdom was stable. When Ji Tianqing entered the city, he didn't even feel any dangerous aura. Looking around, the city was bustling with activity and people were everywhere. The soldiers guarding the city gate were all human martial artists. However, when Ji Tianqing snuck into the city, he found that the city was under the control of the Heaven Punisher tribe. There were more than a dozen martial Sage Realm soldiers guarding the city and they had enslaved all the people and martial artists in the city. Ji Tianqing did not waste time and went to assassinate the soldiers of the Heaven Punisher tribe. He found more than a dozen human martial artists and used the soul-searching technique or threats to force them to give him more information. These human martial artists were the generals guarding the city, the guards of the city governor's mansion, and the leaders of the martial artists in the city. They knew a lot. After an hour, Ji Tianqing left with a gloomy face. Swoosh! He flew across the sky and landed on the back of the Glaze Fire Dragon. Yun Yao had been waiting for a long time. When she saw that he had finally returned, she quickly went up to him to ask about the situation. "Tianqing, have you found out anything? How is the situation?" Ji Tianqing nodded solemnly. Seeing his strange expression, Yun Yao immediately had a bad premonition. She asked, "Could it be that, we guessed it right? The divine nation has been destroyed?" Ji Tianqing nodded again and said calmly, "Not long after we went into seclusion, the heaven-conquering army invaded 3 empires in the south. Not long after, Luo Shui was also killed by the dragon-subduing general. The 2 of them fought fiercely, and the result was unknown. However, ever since then, Luo Shui had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Later on, the remaining 2 empires also announced their surrender. The entire Luo Shui divine kingdom had fallen into the hands of the Heaven Punishers. Now that the war has subsided for a few months, the situation in Scandinavia is gradually stabilizing. Yun Yao had expected this. However, when she heard the news with her own ears, she was still filled with grief and indignation, and her heart was heavy. How could this be? How could the Heaven Punisher race be this powerful? The God nation was destroyed, and even the Divine Master was missing. No wonder. No wonder she didn't reply when we sent her a message. Seeing Yun Yao's grief, Ji Tianqing held her hand and gently patted her back. Don't worry. With Luo Shui's strength, even if she couldn't defeat the dragon-subduing general, she wouldn't have died. She was most likely heavily injured and went into seclusion to recuperate. When she recovers, she will naturally contact us. Apart from this, there was another major event that happened 3 months ago. Yun Yao immediately frowned and asked in confusion, what other thing? Ji Tianqing said indifferently, the demon race of the North Underworld Mountain was unwilling to be left out. They sent out an army of millions of demon race soldiers to wage war against the vast divine kingdom. What? Yun Yao was stunned and asked in disbelief, the Heaven Punishers just invaded the Luo Shui divine kingdom, and now the demon race is attacking the vast divine kingdom? Didn't the demon race suffer a great loss after their defeat a few years ago? Where did they get their confidence from? Could it be that they have reached an agreement with the Heaven Punishers and have some sort of agreement or plan? Ji Tianqing nodded and sneered, the current situation of the continent is very clear. Perhaps it is as you have guessed, that the demon race and the Heaven Punishers are in cahoots. After all, they are all savage and bloodthirsty demons who are good at war and invading. But don't forget that the ancestral demon god and martial god Tianju have long been in cahoots with each other. Yun Yao immediately understood and said, so that's how it is. No wonder the demon race has the confidence to wage war. It seems that they have the help of martial god Tianju. The Heaven Punishers invaded the Luo Shui divine kingdom, the demon race invaded the vast divine kingdom, and martial god Tianju was in the middle. If the demon race succeeds, they will split the continent into 3 and control it. After a pause, she asked again, Tianqing, what should we do now? Should we continue to head to the Luo Shui divine kingdom and assassinate the powerhouses of the Heaven Punishers? Or should we rush to the vast divine kingdom and stop the demon race's invasion? Ji Tianqing said without hesitation, the Luo Shui divine kingdom is already under the control of the Heaven Punishers, and the situation has stabilized. Even if we assassinate the powerhouses of the Heaven Punishers, it will be meaningless. After all, without the Luo Shui divine kingdom, the people might not gather to resist. Our top priority is to rush to the vast divine kingdom and help them. We cannot let the demon race succeed. All right. Yun Yao hurriedly nodded in agreement. The demon race has only been at war for a few months. They are not as strong as the Heaven Punishers, so they should not be advancing so quickly. The two of them made up their minds and did not waste any more time. They urged the glass fire dragon to rush to the vast divine kingdom. Half a month later, the glass fire dragon arrived at the border of the vast divine kingdom. After 8 years, Ji Tianqing returned to this land once again, and he could not help but sigh with emotion. He still remembered that when he had left the vast divine kingdom, he had not yet awakened Kenshin's memories and was still bitterly searching for Yun Yao's whereabouts. At that time, he had only been at the primordial spirit realm, and he had just made a name for himself and was hailed as the vast divine kingdom's most talented disciple. Now, in just 8 short years, he had already reached the peak of the martial way and stepped into the martial god realm. In this world, other than the ancestor fiend god, there was no other person as monstrous as him. In the evening, the glass fire dragon flew near a main city. This main city was located between 2 mountain ranges and was above a canyon. It was a stronghold on the border. However, as early as 3 months ago, this main city was occupied by the demon race. There were still traces of the great battle both inside and outside the city. A large number of demon race warriors were stationed near the tall city gates. The majestic city walls were damaged in many places, and the ground in the city was cracked. Many ruins were left behind. In the canyon outside the city walls, bones and corpses were scattered all over the ground, piling up into a small mountain. There were only a few 100,000 people who were fortunate enough to survive in the city. However, They had all been enslaved by the demon race and were forced to work like the lowest livestock. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao's faces darkened, and intense killing intent burst forth from their bodies. Chapter 24:32. Swish. 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 The 4-foot-long Heaven Burier sword shuttled through the crowd at an extremely fast speed, emitting a sharp sound as it tore through the air. One by one, the demon warriors were pierced through their heads by the burial of Heaven sword. They died on the spot and fell to the ground. Flowers of blood blossomed in the sky one after another, as if it was raining blood. Many demons panicked, letting out painful and frightened roars as they fled in all directions. However, no one could stop the assassination of the burial of Heaven's sword. Anyone who was targeted by the sword energy would die without a doubt. Yun Yao wielded the shadowless dual swords and was on a killing spree in the city. The two swords danced, creating a dazzling light that filled the sky, like a rain of arrows, bursting out in all directions. She was enveloped in a golden ball of light. No one could stop her as she rampaged in the city. Any devil that got close to her would be crushed into pieces, dying without a complete corpse. Meanwhile, Ji Tianqing stood in the sky with a cold expression and looked down at the entire city. He raised his hands slowly and formed a sword seal. He released a sword light that covered the sky. Swish. 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 The dazzling golden sword light was mixed with dense white light. It contained an incomparably sacred power. Wherever the sword light covered, all the demons were killed. All the demon chi and blood light were purified. The sword light was like a torrential downpour. It sealed off the entire city. Tens of thousands of demons had nowhere to run. They could only be killed in despair and then purified into dust. After a short 2 hours, the massacre was over. The 80,000 devils guarding the city were all killed. Not a single one was spared. The defensive formation that enveloped the city, as well as the demon chi and blood light that covered the sky, were all purified and dispersed. The hundreds of thousands of enslaved people cheered excitedly. They were overjoyed that they had survived a calamity. Everyone knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Ji Tianqing and his wife in the sky. They thanked them for saving them. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao did not stay. They quickly turned and left. Then, the two of them headed south toward the hinterland of the vast divine nation. Wherever they passed, they would mercilessly kill the devil race army they encountered. The cities occupied by the devil race were also rescued by the two of them. On the evening of the 4th day, when the two of them arrived at the main city of a fortress, they encountered a troublesome matter. The main city was occupied by 200,000 demons, and the commander-in-chief was a newly promoted demon saint. In addition, there were 500,000 humans in the city who had been demonized. They had all become puppets that were neither human nor ghost. They were extremely strong, cruel, and bloodthirsty. They were completely at the mercy of the devil race. When Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao slaughtered their way into the city and massacred the devil army, those demonized human civilians rose up and besieged them. Originally, with Ji Tianqing's strength and means, he could have used a destructive divine art to destroy the entire city. What demon army? What demonized commoners? They would all be annihilated. However, Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao were both benevolent and virtuous. It was impossible for them to use such cruel means. After all, those 500,000 commoners were innocent. They were powerless to resist or escape. They had been demonized by the devil race and lost their minds. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao were surrounded and attacked by the devil race army and commoners. Fortunately, the two of them were strong. The attacks of the commoners and the devil race army could not threaten them at all. In the end, Ji Tianqing used the power of the heaven-mending orb to cast the mysterious sky demon suppression art. 9 dazzling, holy, and majestic divine power shockwaves swept through the entire city. Instantly, the demonized commoners all fainted from the shock and fell to the ground. The devil qi in their bodies was also quickly dispelled. In this way, Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao were no longer restrained. They could slaughter the devil race army without worry. The battle lasted for half a day. 95% of the devil race army was slaughtered. Only a few thousand people escaped from the city and fled in all directions. The commander of the army was also instantly killed by Ji Tianqing's sword. That newly ascended devil saint was so weak that he was not even worth mentioning. After the battle, Ji Tianqing used the divine light illumination again to heal the hundreds of thousands of commoners. After a night of treatment, those commoners woke up one after another. They were all demonized and regained their sanity. Therefore, everyone prostrated themselves on the ground and worshipped Ji Tianqing. They were very grateful. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao did not stop. After leaving the main city, they continued to advance southward. 10 days later, the two of them arrived at Taiyuan City. This was the hinterland of the vast divine nation. It was only 400,000 miles away from Mount God bestowment. At the same time, this was also the front line of the war. It was the place where the battle was most intense. Outside Taiyuan City was an endless mountain range. The mountains were majestic and the terrain was steep. In the wilderness and deep valleys north of the mountain range, there were almost 500,000 devil race soldiers and more than 800,000 demonized commoners. Taiyuan City south of the mountain range had not fallen yet. It was in a state of high alert. Every day, there were thousands of scouts roaming outside the city to monitor and investigate the movements of the devil race. Inside and outside the city walls were lined with human soldiers. They were all fully armed and ready to fight at any time. Squads of soldiers shuttled back and forth inside the city. They were either setting up defenses or patrolling guards. Most commoners had already left Taiyuan City and moved to the south. Only a small number of commoners had not left. They stayed in their homes to avoid trouble. They closed their doors and windows tightly and did not dare to show their faces. The sky above the city was shrouded in an extremely oppressive and heavy atmosphere. Since last night, Taiyuan City had received news that the devil race's army was approaching. Even now, everyone's nerves were stretched taut. They did not dare to relax at all. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao rode on the glass fire dragon and openly arrived above the city. The two of them were like two lanterns in the dark night, bringing a ray of light to the gloomy Taiyuan City. Immediately, a squad of guards flew into the sky and greeted Ji Tianqing and his wife. They also questioned the two of them about their identities and intentions. Ji Tianqing did not hide his identity. He said directly, "Tell the city guard that Ji Tianqing is here. I have something important to ask him." The captain of the guards was stunned. He had a confused expression on his face. The other 9 guards' expressions also changed dramatically. Their eyes widened in disbelief as they looked at each other in dismay. After a long while, someone finally reacted and let out a low exclamation of excitement. "Ji Tianqing. The leader of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, the heavenly imperial guardian of the Luoshui divine nation. Are you really young Master Ji? I remember that you were the #1 God's disciple of the vast divine nation. My heavens! Young Master Ji has graced Taiyuan City with his presence. How is this possible? Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Young Master Ji is a Kenshin. How can such a noble and important person appear here?" The guards were so excited that their words were incoherent. They were both shocked and honored. Seeing this, Ji Tianqing frowned. He said in a dignified tone, "Who is the city guard? Tell him to come out and see me." The captain of the guards came back to his senses and hurriedly bowed. He said, "Please calm down, young Master Ji. Your sudden arrival in Taiyuan City has made us feel overwhelmed. That's why we lost our composure. Chapter 2433. Emperor Yunqi. Taihao Yunqi. 7th Shensi. Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and looked surprised. He just remembered that Taiyuan city was also part of the Chu Yun Empire. After he killed the Chu Yun Emperor, he sent a message to martial god Taihao and recommended Taihao Yunqi to take over the Chu Yun Empire. He didn't expect that Taihao Yunqi would risk his life to guard Taiyuan city when the demon army attacked the Taihao Divine Kingdom. The captain of the guards observed Ji Tianqing's expression and asked carefully, "Mr. Ji, do you know Emperor Yunqi?" Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "Don't waste any more time. Go and report to Taihao Yunqi." The captain of the guards didn't dare to waste any more time. He bowed and quickly went into the city to report. A short while later, a dazzling white light suddenly lit up the gloomy Taiyuan city and sped towards Ji Tianqing at full speed. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, the white light arrived and stopped in front of the glazed fire dragon. After the white light disappeared, a young man wearing golden armor and a golden crown with jade inlaid on his head appeared. This handsome young man in golden armor was the 7th Shensi. He looked at Ji Tianqing with excitement and surprise in his eyes. His face was full of disbelief. "Mr. Ji. I didn't expect it to be you." As he spoke, the 7th Shensi bowed to Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao and said excitedly, "Greetings, Mr. and Mrs. Ji." Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao nodded with a smile and raised their hands to signal him to rise. 7th Shensi, long time no see. You're even more handsome than before. Ji Tianqing joked with a smile. The 7th Shensi also replied with a smile, "Mr. Ji, you must be joking. If you didn't recommend me to my father, how could I take over the Chu Yun Empire? I've always kept this friendship in my heart and will never forget it." Ji Tianqing waved his hand and exchanged a few words with him. The 7th god's son bowed and made a "please" gesture. "Mr. Ji, Mrs. Ji, this is not the place to talk. Please follow me into the city." Ji Tianqing nodded and brought Yun Yao through the great city barrier array, flying towards the city lord's mansion. 100 breaths later, the three of them entered the city lord mansion's reception hall and took their seats. The 7th god's child asked the maids to serve tea and snacks. His expression became serious again as he said, "Young Master Ji, Jojo and I were worried about you for a long time when we learned that the Pillar of Heaven's mountains had been destroyed. After that, there was no news of you. We thought that with your heaven-defying methods, nothing would happen to you. Sooner or later, you would make a comeback. Now that you've returned safely, your strength seems to have improved again." The 7th prince could only see that Ji Tianqing had become even more unfathomable, but he couldn't tell what level he was at. Ji Tianqing didn't expose him. He nodded slightly and said, "That's true. Unfortunately, when I came out of seclusion, the Luoshui Divine Kingdom had already been destroyed. Even the vast Divine Kingdom had been invaded by the demon race. This time, I came from the ruins of God and went all the way south. I saw that half of the vast Divine Kingdom had been occupied by the demon race. Tell me more about the current situation of the Divine Kingdom." The 7th god's son was stunned. He asked in disbelief, "Young Master Ji, did you come to the vast Divine Kingdom to help us defend against the demon race's invasion?" Ji Tianqing smiled and asked, "Why? Am I not welcome?" The 7th god's son waved his hand and exclaimed with joy, "How can I not welcome you? This is great. I didn't even dare to dream about it. Young Master Ji, you're the human powerhouse who knows the demon race the best. You've defeated the demon race's army and defended the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. Rumor has it that you're the demon race's biggest nemesis. Now that you're willing to help the vast Divine Kingdom defend against the demon race, it's a great merit and a blessing for all the people of the Divine Kingdom." As he spoke, the 7th god's son stood up and bowed to Ji Tianqing. He said solemnly, "Young Master Ji, on behalf of all the people of the Divine Kingdom, I thank you for saving my life. The vast divine kingdom will never forget your kindness. Ji Tianqing raised his hand and used his invisible divine power to help him up. He said calmly, "You don't have to be so polite, seventh god's son. I have a blood feud with the demon race, and the demon race is the mortal enemy of the human race. Moreover, your father and I have some history. I won't sit back and do nothing no matter what." Hearing this, the seventh god's son's body shook. His eyes shone with a strange light. He looked at Ji Tianqing in a daze and exclaimed in his heart, "So it's true. It was only a rumor that young Master Ji was the reincarnation of Kenshin. Now that he has admitted it himself, it seems that it's true." Thinking of this, he bowed to Ji Tianqing again and said respectfully, "Senior Kenshin, I've offended you before. My father has mentioned to us many times that you gave him advice in the past, and he has always been grateful. On behalf of my father, I'd like to thank you for your guidance." The seventh god's son regarded himself as a junior in front of Kenshin, so he was even more respectful. Ji Tianqing immediately frowned and waved his hand. "Seventh god's son, you don't have to be so polite. I'm still Ji Tianqing. You can still call me young Master Ji." This. Taihao Yinchi was a little hesitant. Yin Yao said gently, "Seventh god's son, the divine kingdom is in danger now. Let's not be so formal. Let's talk about business first." The seventh god's son nodded quickly and said with a smile, "Madam is right. Then I'll do as you say." Then, he reported to Ji Tianqing, "Young Master Ji, the divine kingdom is in a critical situation now. 3.5 of the 8 empires have fallen. The Thousand Snow Empire, the Flowing Wind Empire, and the White Night Empire have been occupied by the demon army. More than half of the Chu Yun Empire has also been occupied. There are only 100 or so cities left. In this war, the demon army has gathered 8 million elite soldiers and divided them into 10 armies to attack from the north all the way to the south. According to the information we have, the commander of the 8 million soldiers is the ancestor demon god. There are also 5 demon saints, 2,000 demon generals, and thousands of blood gods under the demon god." After hearing this, Ji Tianqing had a general understanding of the demon army's strength and attack route. He nodded and said, "Yes, this information should be correct. Now that the demon army only has this strength, it can be said that they have turned out in full force. However, there should only be 4 demon saints left." The seventh god's son was startled and showed a puzzled expression. Yin Yao explained to him, "When we went south, we saved more than 30 cities and killed a demon saint, hundreds of demon generals, and dozens of blood gods. In addition, there are more than 1 million demon army." The seventh god's son suddenly understood. He said with surprise, "I see. No wonder a few days ago, a scout reported that there were powerhouses assassinating the demon army in the Thousand Snow Empire. So it was young Master Ji and Madam Ji who did it." Ji Tianqing nodded and continued to ask, "Seventh god's son, tell me about the situation of your defense." Chapter 24-34. Speaking of martial god Taihao, the seventh god's son's eyes brightened. His mood was also lifted, and he said expectantly, "Soon. Father already knows about the invasion of the demon race, and he will come out soon. This time, Father has been in seclusion for more than 600 years, and he will definitely succeed." Ji Tianqing only nodded slightly and didn't say anything. In fact, he knew that even if martial god Taihao really succeeded, he would at most have the same strength as martial god Tianju. He still couldn't defeat the ancestor demon god, let alone General Fu Long. One was the reincarnation of an ancient demon god, and the other was the leader of an alien race. They were both extremely powerful. The seventh god's son continued, "Now, the situation in the god nation is turbulent, and the people are fleeing to the south to seek refuge, just like the Luo Shui god nation. We have mobilized all the forces we can. Including the disciples, deacons, elders, and protectors of Mount God, they have all led the troops to join the battle. My 90 brothers and sisters have also rushed to the front line to guard the major fortresses. The corners of Ji Tianqing's mouth curled into a smile as he said, "Your godfather can be considered to have foresight on this matter. He has 99 children, and 99 generals in the war." The seventh god's son smiled awkwardly and shook his head, "Young Master Ji, you must be joking. Although father has 99 children, there are only 20 of them who are good enough. There are only a few of them who have the ability to lead a country. To be honest, most of my brothers and sisters are not as talented as Jiu. When Jiu was mentioned, Ji Tianqing asked, "By the way, where is Jiu? Is she also leading the troops to fight alone?" The seventh god's son sighed and said helplessly, "Everyone loves her, and they are afraid that she will have an accident on the battlefield, so they let her stay in the rear and be in charge of the mobilization of troops and food." But she didn't agree and insisted on rushing to the front line. She wanted to be the deputy commander of the scout corps, and she wanted to gather information personally. Everyone couldn't persuade her, so they could only agree with her decision. But Big Brother and I were worried, so we asked Fourth Brother to go with her so that we can take care of her. Ji Tianqing thought for a moment, then said with a solemn voice, "With Jiu's overall strength, as long as she doesn't encounter any fiend saint or fiend deities, she should be safe. But since she was leading the troops, it was likely that she would go to the most dangerous place, which was worrying. She is your father God's most beloved daughter. If the demons take advantage of this and use her as a hostage, I'm afraid it will be difficult." The seventh god's son also nodded in agreement. "Yes." We all understood this and tried to persuade her many times, but she just wouldn't listen. "Young Master Ji, Jiu trusts you the most and listens to you the most. Since you're here, why don't you send her a message and ask her to come back?" Ji Tianqing nodded without hesitation. The seventh prince hurriedly took out a special communication jade slip and handed it to him. Ji Tianqing took the jade slip and used his spiritual consciousness to leave behind a message before sending the jade slip out. Swish! The jade slip turned into a stream of light and disappeared into the sky. The seventh prince was obviously relieved when he saw that the jade slip had been sent out. In his opinion, as long as Ji Tianqing asked, Jiu would definitely come back. At this moment, Ji Tianqing said in a solemn voice, "Seventh Prince, do you have a battle plan to fight against the demons? Given the current situation of the God Nation, what are you going to do next?" The seventh prince nodded and said, "Of course we have a battle plan. It covers all kinds of emergency plans and will be adjusted as the situation changes. But since you're here, we want to listen to your suggestions even more. Father God hasn't come out of seclusion yet, so I hope you can be the commander-in-chief and command the whole war. After all, you know the demons better than we do, and you've defeated millions of demons before." After saying that, the seventh god's son looked at Ji Tianqing with sparkling eyes. His eyes were full of hope and expectation. In his mind, Ji Tianqing was the nemesis of the demons and the savior of the vast God Nation. However, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said in a solemn voice, "I've already thought about it before I came. I won't be the commander-in-chief, and I won't interfere in military affairs. Maybe you don't know that I was able to defeat the demons and defend the territory of the Luoshui God Nation not because of my commanding and war talent. It's because I've been carrying out the decapitation plan." The decapitation plan? The seventh prince frowned and roughly understood what he meant. Ji Tianqing nodded and said with a solemn expression, "Only by assassinating the commanders and powerhouses of the demons can we destroy the fighting power of the demons in the shortest time possible. For example, if I kill the ancestor demon god, the fighting spirit of the demons will collapse, and will have won half the battle. If I kill 4 demon saints and 2,000 demon generals, the demons will be leaderless and collapse on their own." The seventh prince was overwhelmed with emotions and nodded repeatedly. "Yes, that's right. However, Carrying out the decapitation plan means that you have to sneak into the demon's camp and put yourself in the most dangerous situation. Young Master Ji, Yinchi, and Jiujiu don't want you to be in danger. Ji Tianqing smiled and said in a playful tone, "You probably don't know that my main purpose of coming to the vast divine kingdom is to kill the ancestor demon god and take revenge." Ah! The seventh prince was shocked and said in a low voice in disbelief, "Young Master Ji, have you broken through to the immortal state?" Ji Tianqing nodded slightly. The seventh prince's body trembled and he was overjoyed. He cheered excitedly. "This is unbelievable. This was simply an unheard-of story. Young Master Ji, you are definitely the #1 genius since the beginning of time, and there will be no one like you in the future. When you left the vast divine kingdom, you were only at the primordial spirit state. Now, only 8 years have passed, and you're already a peerless martial god. This is like a dream." This news had a huge impact on the seventh god's child. He was so shocked that he lost his composure. After a while, he calmed down. After thinking for a while, he frowned and said awkwardly, "Young Master Ji, since you've broken through to the immortal state, it shouldn't be difficult for you to kill the ancestor demon god. However, since the start of the war, the ancestor demon god has only appeared once. His whereabouts have always been mysterious, and we don't know where he's hiding." Ji Tianqing smiled coldly and said calmly, "I don't need to find him. As long as I kill the 4 demon saints and many demon generals, he will come to me." That's true." The seventh prince nodded and said in a complicated tone, "After all, the ancestor demon god hates you to the core and will definitely find a way to deal with you." Ji Tianqing didn't say anything else and walked out. "Okay, it's settled. You guys continue with the battle plan, and I'll carry out the decapitation plan." Chapter 24:35. To the weak, war was extremely terrifying. To defend against the invasion of the demon race and protect one's home and country, one needed all kinds of strategies. But to Ji Tianqing, who possessed peerless martial strength and heaven-defying divine abilities, it was very simple to resolve a war. He only needed to kill the leaders and generals of the demon race, and the morale of the demon race army would naturally crumble. After leaving the city lord's residence, he and Yunyao flew out of Taiyuan city and entered the mountain range in the north. There was a valley in the mountain range, where 100,000 demon race soldiers and 500,000 demonized civilians were stationed. This army was the vanguard of the attack on Taiyuan city. They were the so-called cannon fodder. The demon race wanted to use the lives of these hundreds of thousands of demonized civilians to blast open the gates of Taiyuan city. When Ji Tianqing and Yunyao arrived, the 100,000 demon race soldiers and 500,000 demonized civilians were gathering and preparing to attack. The two of them immediately snuck into the demon race camp and unleashed earth-shattering divine abilities to launch a surprise attack. Fortunately for them, the demon race soldiers and demonized civilians were gathered separately. The two of them unleashed their divine abilities and secret techniques to their heart's content, slaughtering the demon race army without restraint. In just a short span of 100 breaths, the 100,000 devil army had been completely routed. The dozens of demon race generals were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They led a few blood gods' illusions and charged over without any regard for their own safety. They surrounded and attacked Ji Tianqing and his wife. The 500,000 demonized civilians also attacked the two of them under the command of the demon race. And so, Ji Tianqing and Yunyao turned to assassinate the demon race generals and the blood gods' illusions. The sword of burial of heaven flew into the sky and transformed into a streak of black light of death, weaving through the crowd. Every time the cold light flashed, it would take the life of a demon race general. Yunyao wielded the shadowless dual swords and flashed through the crowd, constantly killing one demon race expert after another. Ji Tianqing weaved through the tide of people with his bare hands and quickly reaped the lives of the demon race generals. He would either strike with his palm, punch with his fist, or point with his finger. He constantly unleashed all kinds of divine abilities. Every move he made was a fatal killing move. Not a single devil general could withstand a single blow from him. Even the blood god, who was almost immortal, was easily defeated by his divine power. On the other hand, the attacks of the 500,000 demonized civilians were like tickles to him. They posed no threat at all. 15 minutes later, over 100 demon generals and blood gods were killed by Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao. The demon army was left without a leader. The remaining 10,000 or so demon army soldiers scattered in all directions. The 500,000 demonized civilians also retreated, covering the escape of the devil army. Upon seeing this, Ji Tianqing decisively executed the mysterious heaven devil suppression secret technique. He released 9 earth-shattering shockwaves that enveloped the entire valley. All of a sudden, the blood chi and demonic mist within a radius of 300 miles were dispelled by the holy white light. The 400,000 demonized commoners were also knocked unconscious, and most of the demonic chi in their bodies dissipated. The situation was set. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao chased after the fleeing devil army. After chasing for over 1,000 miles and spending 15 minutes, they finally killed all of the remaining 10,000 or so demon army soldiers. After taking care of the remaining soldiers, Ji Tianqing returned to the valley and used a secret technique to purify the demonized civilians. With his previous experience, he was able to purify the demonic chi with twice the result with half the effort. He was extremely fast. In just 2 hours, he had purified the demonic chi in the civilians' bodies. After the civilians and martial artists woke up and understood what had happened, they thanked Ji Tianqing profusely and shed tears of gratitude. Ji Tianqing didn't waste any time. He left the valley with Yun Yao and rushed to the barren plains in the north of the mountain range. There were 400,000 demon army soldiers and 300,000 demonized civilians stationed in the barren plains. This army was the main force advancing south. They were all elites. After the army in the valley breached Taiyuan City, this main force would advance south. However, they didn't receive news that Taiyuan City had been breached. Instead, they received bad news that their allies had been attacked and suffered heavy casualties. When Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao arrived in the sky above the barren plains, this main force was preparing to retreat. The main general and the other generals knew that 2 peerless elites had slaughtered 100,000 demon army soldiers in the valley. They had also killed many generals. They were deeply terrified. They only wanted to lead the army away from Taiyuan City and temporarily avoid danger. However, the ordinary soldiers didn't know what had happened, and they didn't know what was going on. Ever since they invaded the vast divine nation, everything had been smooth sailing. They were invincible and unstoppable. But now, the main general suddenly ordered a retreat. Many soldiers were caught off guard and panicked. As a result, the army's retreat was a little chaotic and slow. After Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao arrived, they attacked without hesitation. They unleashed earth-shattering divine powers and secret techniques on the demon army. The glazed fire dragon also joined the battle. It unleashed glazed golden flames that covered the sky and scorched the barren plains for hundreds of miles. Lava flowed everywhere. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of demon army soldiers were slaughtered. Their formation became chaotic. Many commanders of the demon clan cursed angrily. They didn't care about their own lives, storming over and besieging Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao. Dozens of blood gods' illusions also hid in the dark, waiting for an opportunity to launch fatal attacks. The 2 of them were fearless. They withstood the attacks of the demon army and killed the generals and blood gods' illusions. One tribulation realm demon general after another died under their swords. They were either beheaded or smashed into pieces. This battle was far more dangerous and intense than the one in the valley. After a full 2 hours, the battle finally ended. More than 200 demon generals, including the main general, were killed by Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao. More than half of the 400,000 demon army soldiers were also killed by the two of them. More than 380,000 of them were killed or injured. The remaining 20,000 demon army soldiers fled and were chased by Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao. More than 80% of them were killed. Of course, 60 or 70,000 of the 300,000 demonized people were also killed or injured. Ji Tianqing performed the Xian Tian demon suppression art and purified the surviving people with the power of the Tian mending orb. It was already 6 hours later when he finished dealing with these things and returned to Taiyuan City. It was late at night. The entire Taiyuan City was dead silent. Under the night sky, only a few buildings were still lit. There were no signs of people on the streets. Only patrolling guards were walking back and forth. The entire city was still shrouded in an oppressive atmosphere. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao returned to the city lord's mansion and planned to rest for the night. However, when Ji Tianqing saw the seventh prince, he found that the seventh prince was pacing back and forth in his study. He looked quite anxious. Ji Tianqing realized that something was wrong. He asked, "Seventh prince, what happened?" Chapter 24:36. Ji Tianqing frowned at the seventh god's son's words. He asked with concern, "What's going on?" The seventh god's son quickly explained, "I haven't been able to contact her since the day before yesterday. She didn't even reply to your messages. An hour ago, my fourth brother sent me a message saying that Jiu broke into Xingyue City alone to spy on the demon race's camp. She might have been killed." Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and asked, "Seventh god's son, don't worry. Tell me the details. What's the situation in Xingyue City? Who's in charge? Jiu can't be contacted at the moment. How can you be sure that she's been killed?" The seventh god's son took a deep breath and calmed himself down. He explained, "Xingyue City is to the west of Taiyuan City, about 40,000 kilometers away. It's a 1,000-year-old ancient city that was only occupied by the demon race's army a few days ago. According to my fourth brother, there's an elite demon race army in the city, as well as a large number of demonized people and more than 20 blood gods. As for who the commander is, my fourth brother doesn't know. That's why Jiu broke into Xingyue City alone to investigate the demon race. According to the usual practice, Jiu will stay in the city for at most 1 day before leaving. Even if there's a special situation, she can't stay for more than 2 days. Also, whenever my fourth brother and I sent her messages, she would reply as soon as possible. But now, we haven't heard from her for a few days. I can't help but suspect that she's trapped in Xingyue City." Ji Tianqing's expression became more and more serious. He continued to ask, "What about your fourth brother? Isn't he with Jiu?" The seventh god's son sighed and said, "My fourth brother was carrying out another mission and told her to stay in the scout camp. I didn't expect her to. My fourth brother just sent me a message and told me not to worry too much. He's already on his way to Xingyue City. I believe we'll hear from him soon." Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and said in a serious tone, "Seventh god's son, just focus on guarding Taiyuan City. I'll go to Xingyue City myself. If Jiu is really in danger, I'll definitely save her." The seventh god's son was stunned for a moment. He quickly bowed to express his gratitude. "Thank you, young Master Ji. With you personally taking action, nothing will go wrong. I can rest assured." Ji Tianqing nodded and said nothing more. He turned and left the study. When he returned to his residence and saw that Yun Yao was resting, he told her the truth. Yao, you stay here and rest well. I need to make a trip to Starmoon City and will be back soon." Jiu snuck into Starmoon City alone to spy on the demon race. There has been no news from her for 3 days now. I'm afraid she has met with some mishap. Yun Yao thought for a moment and asked with concern, "Jiu?" The youngest daughter of martial god Taihao. Is she the little girl who guided you to the Shenwu continent? Ji Tianqing nodded and spoke with a complicated tone. Back then, I knew nothing about the Shenwu continent, and she was the one who told me a lot of important information. Later on, when I came to the vast divine kingdom to cultivate on Mount God Seal, she took care of me many times. Yunyao nodded and said solemnly, if that's the case, then she's in danger. Naturally, you have to rescue her. You're duty-bound. Why don't I go with you? Ji Tianqing waved his hand and comforted her, there's no need. You've been running around with me for so long and haven't rested at all. I can handle this. You just stay here and rest. I'll be back soon. All right, Yunyao nodded in agreement and gently reminded him, then you have to be careful. Don't underestimate the enemy. Ji Tianqing waved at her and turned to leave. Once he was out of the room, he leaped into the night sky and rushed west as fast as lightning. At the same time, 40,000 kilometers away from Taiyuan City, in the modeled Star Moon City. Under the night sky, the city was shrouded in a layer of black demonic energy. It was cold and deathly still. The north and south gates were tightly shut and were guarded by a large number of demon race soldiers. Nearly 100,000 soldiers were stationed on the surrounding walls. The entire Star Moon City had become the demon army's main camp. There were 600,000 demon race soldiers and 400,000 demonized civilians stationed there. There was also a large number of elite experts in the city lord's residence, making it even more impregnable. At this time, within the city lord's residence, there was an ancient underground palace deep underground that was enveloped by a powerful holy formation. The entrances and main passages of the underground palace were guarded by a large number of murderous demon race soldiers dressed in black armor. In the deepest part of the underground palace, there was a large hall that was 1,000 feet wide. Blood-red lights lit up the surrounding walls. The air was filled with black demonic energy and the cold aura of death. In the center of the hall, there was a 100-meter-tall demon altar. It looked like the head of a demon and was completely black and red. The surface of the altar was densely covered in formation patterns that were glowing with a dark red light. It looked eerie and strange. At the top of the altar, there was a stone pillar carved with a demon. A petite girl covered in blood was chained to the pillar. She was only 4 feet tall and had a small round face that looked like an apple. She also had a pair of large golden eyes. Anyone who saw her would think that she was cute. Unfortunately, she was already heavily injured at this moment, and she was in an extremely miserable and sorry state. Her red dress had long been torn and tattered. Her blonde hair was disheveled and the hair accessories on her head were shattered. Her exposed arms and legs were covered with hideous wounds that were so deep that the bones could be seen. 2 specially made black soul-sealing chains passed through her shoulders and bound her body, firmly tying her to the stone pillar. There was a fist-sized bloody hole on each of her shoulders. Her skin and flesh curled outwards, revealing her white shoulder blades. The black chains passed through the joints of her bones and black blood kept flowing out of the wounds. An indistinct blood-red light shrouded her from head to toe, suppressing her soul. A delicate, cute, petite, and weak girl had been subjected to such cruel torture. Such a scene was extremely impactful and shocking. At this time, the sound of footsteps could be heard in the hall. A tall and burly demon race man in a loose black robe walked out of the darkness. He was more than 10 feet tall and as strong as an iron tower. His bald head was covered with demon race patterns and his whole body was emitting a ferocious aura. He was the 3rd demon saint, Ba Tuo. Ba Tuo passed through the darkness and flew to the top of the demon altar. He stood in front of the little girl and sneered. "Dear Princess Jiujio, have you thought about what I said before?" Hearing Ba Tuo's words, Jiujio, who was tied to the stone pillar, slowly opened her eyes. Her big eyes that were as clear as water had long since become dim and lifeless. Her golden eyes were filled with grief, anger, and murderous intent. She glared at Batua angrily and shouted in a hoarse voice, "Damned demon! Don't even think about it." Chapter 24:37. Jiujiu's expression and tone were filled with grief and indignation. Batua raised an eyebrow as a mocking sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Huh, the relationship between you siblings is really deep. You would rather die than obey my orders. Your brother knows that you've been captured, but he still wants to die. TSK TSK TSK, what a foolish and laughable pair of God's son and daughter." Jiujiu's eyes widened when she heard this. Anxiety flashed through her eyes. "Great demon, what do you mean?" Batua did not answer. He turned around and waved at the darkness. Soon, two demon generals in blood-red armor walked out from the dark corner of the hall. The two tall demon generals carried a skinny young man in a golden robe toward the devil's altar. The young man's hair was messy, and his long hair was stained with blood. His golden robe was tattered and stained with blood. His arms were stiff like wood, and his legs were cut off at the knees. There were dozens of wounds all over his body. He was in a semi-conscious state and was dragged over by the two demon generals like a piece of wood. Everywhere they passed, the ground was splattered with drops of dark red blood. When the two demon generals carried the young man to the devil's altar, Jiujiu's expression changed. She stared at the young man in disbelief. Tears welled up in her eyes as she cried out sorrowfully, "Fourth brother! Fourth brother, why are you so foolish?" With Jiujiu's intelligence, of course, she could guess what was going on. Therefore, she was worried and angry. At the same time, her heart was filled with guilt and self-blame. Batua saw Jiujiu's tear-stained face and could not help but sneer proudly. "Huh, so it's martial god Taihao's fourth son. That's great. I've suddenly changed my mind. A mere 10 main cities and 1,000,000 soldiers are nothing to me. Jiujiu, I heard you're martial god Taihao's favorite daughter. If I use your lives to exchange for a treasure from him, what do you think he'll do?" Batua looked up to the sky and laughed loudly. He looked arrogant and proud. Jiujiu gritted her teeth in anger and cursed fiercely, "Batua! You despicable and shameless devil, Father God will definitely tear you to pieces and make you regret being born into this world." Batua wasn't angry at all. Instead, he sneered contemptuously, The vast divine kingdom is about to be destroyed. Your father can't even protect himself, so why would he care about your lives? Cherish the last few days of your life. When your father comes out, you will no longer have any value." After saying that, Tatua waved his hand and shot out a cloud of devil chi. The cloud of devil chi enveloped the severely injured fourth god's son and pressed him against the stone pillar at the top of the altar. Ka ka ka. Under the control of Tatua, the two dark and cold soul-sealing chains pierced through the shoulders of the fourth god's child like two poisonous snakes and tied him to the stone pillar. The soul-sealing chains moved and pulled at Jiujiu's wound, causing dirty blood to spurt out. The chains rubbed against her shoulder blades, making a dry, bone-chilling sound. The piercing pain caused her entire body to tremble, and her face was ghastly pale. She couldn't help but let out a muffled groan. The fourth god's child was also awakened by the piercing pain and let out a painful scream. Seeing this, Tatua sneered eerily, "Your two noble highnesses, stay here and enjoy the torment of the soul-burning altar." Ha ha ha. After saying that, Tatua shook his loose black robe and left with the two devil generals. Jiujiu and the fourth god's child were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They stared at Tatuo's disappearing figure and cursed angrily. After a long while, the fourth god's child finally calmed down. He and Jiujiu were tied to the two sides of the stone pillar, back to back, and tied to the same soul-sealing chains. Once one of them struggled too much, the other would also be tortured. Therefore, Both of them could only endure the soul-burning and bone-eroding pain, not daring to act rashly. The fourth god's child panted for a while before he said in a hoarse voice, "Jiujiu, why were you so reckless as to sneak into Xingyue's city alone? Do you know that my seventh brother and I, as well as many other brothers and sisters, were all very worried about you?" Jiujiu leaned weakly against the stone pillar and said with tears in her eyes, "Fourth brother, I'm sorry, I dragged you into this. Why were you so stupid? You knew that I was captured, yet you still came to Xingyue's city to die." The fourth god's child smiled bitterly and said, "Before entering Xingyue city, no one knew what was going on in the city. There were actually 2 devil saints guarding the city. We haven't heard from you for 3 days. Even if I had to take the risk, I still had to sneak into the city to look for you. Now, I got what I asked for. You don't have to blame yourself. Being able to see you again, as long as you're still alive, your fourth brother will be comforted." After a moment of silence, he sighed again and said, "Sigh. It's a pity that I lost to Tatua and that devil saint. I didn't even have the chance to send a message to my seventh brother." Jiujiu was also silent, not knowing how to answer. She was extremely regretful. No matter how much she cared about the country and its people, she shouldn't have been so reckless to help the god nation. What was done could not be undone. She and her fourth brother were both in prison. No matter how much she regretted it, it would be useless. In her heart, she only hoped that it wouldn't matter if she died, but she didn't want to implicate her other brothers and sisters. In particular, she couldn't let the devil race use her to threaten her father. Although the brother and sister were silent, they had the same idea in their hearts. The fourth god's child knew that he was going to die, so he didn't ask for anything else. He only hoped that the pain would end as soon as possible. Soon, their divine souls couldn't withstand the torture of the altar and gradually fell into a coma. However, at this moment, a trace of divine power suddenly flashed in a dark corner of the hall. Swoosh! A ripple appeared in the darkness, and a blurry figure appeared in the corner of the hall. This figure was a handsome young human wearing a white robe. He was tall and burly, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. He had a mysterious and majestic aura around him. This was the underground palace in the depths of the city lord's mansion. It was heavily guarded, had countless experts, and was protected by a saint-level array. But to him, these were not worth mentioning. Not to mention the entire Xingyue city, even the entire world could come and go as he pleased. Because he was Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing stood in the darkness, his cold and indifferent gaze sweeping across his surroundings. The next moment, he locked his eyes on the altar and stared at Jiujiu and the fourth god's child on the stone pillars. His cold eyes became a lot gentler. After seeing Jiujiu's situation, there was even a trace of pity and anger in his eyes. Swoosh! Ji Tianqing's body flashed and he arrived at the top of the altar in front of Jiujiu. He looked at Jiujiu, who was severely injured and unconscious, and said with his divine mind, "Jiujiu, wake up." Jiujiu, who was unconscious, vaguely heard his call and tried to open her blurry eyes. She stared at Ji Tianqing and was stunned for a long time before she recognized him. Chapter 2438. Jiujiu did not expect Ji Tianqing to come and save her. This was the most painful and desperate moment for her. She thought that no one could save her other than her father God. Even if the holy sons of the martial sage realm came, they would end up like the fourth holy son. They would be severely injured by Ming Tua and imprisoned in this underground palace. She did not want her brothers to be implicated, so she did not expect anyone to save her. However, fate was so wonderful. The person she least expected had appeared. Tianqing. Why are you in Starmoon City? After the Pillar of Heaven's mountain was destroyed, you disappeared for half a year. Where have you been? Jiujiu was a little emotional. She looked at Ji Tianqing with burning eyes and asked with concern. She had been worried about Ji Tianqing ever since she knew that the Pillar of Heaven's mountain was destroyed. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said calmly, "Jiu, it's a long story. I'll explain it to you after I save you. Wake your fourth brother up and let him be prepared. I'm going to break the chains." Jiu knew that the situation was critical and it was not the time to catch up. She followed Ji Tianqing's instructions and called the fourth holy son. The fourth holy son's spiritual soul was severely injured and he was on the verge of losing consciousness. Jiu called him a few times before he woke up. Then, Ji Tianqing took out the Burial of Heaven sword and infused his divine power into the Burial of Heaven sword to form a sacred white sword radiance. He held the Burial of Heaven sword in his right hand and slashed it down. Crack! With a soft sound, the soul-sealing chains that were as thick as wrists were cut off by the Burial of Heaven sword. Ji Tianqing moved quickly. Jiu and the fourth holy son did not feel any pain and they regained their freedom. The two of them endured the pain and struggled with all their might. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and hundreds of dazzling lights were shot out, dispelling the demonic power that sealed them. After a short while, when Jiu and the fourth divine child broke free from the seal, the evil demon altar shook violently, and dozens of cracks appeared on it. The altar trembled incessantly, emitting a muffled rumbling sound that spread throughout the underground palace. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing frowned, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "You guys hide first, the two devil saints will be here soon." Jiu and the fourth god's child were panting heavily as they were immersed in the excitement of surviving the calamity. Suddenly hearing Ji Tianqing's words, the two of them tensed up and revealed worried expressions. "Tianqing, let's go. I've already implicated fourth brother, I don't want to implicate you as well. There are two great devil saints in the city. One of them is Batua, and he's very powerful." Before the fourth divine prince could finish, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and interrupted him. He opened the entrance to the sword world and said in a deep voice, "Enter the sword world and rest for a while. Since I've come to Star Moon City, I can't possibly return empty-handed." Jiu and the fourth god's child were startled and revealed a puzzled expression. "Tianqing, what are you trying to do?" "Young Master Ji, you must be careful. Don't be careless." Ji Tianqing's lips curled into a cold smile, and his eyes revealed a strong murderous intent. "If I don't kill the two great devil saints and destroy the devil race army in Star Moon City, wouldn't my trip here be in vain?" Jiu and the fourth god's child were stunned and revealed a shocked expression. Before the two of them could persuade him, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and shot out a ray of golden light, taking the two of them into the sword world. Almost at the same time, the door at the corner of the hall opened. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Two burly figures in black robes flashed through the darkness and came to the center of the hall at lightning speed. They were two devil race experts whose bodies were as strong as iron towers, and their appearances were ferocious and terrifying. The leader was a bald man, and it was Batua. The middle-aged man beside him had a head of purple hair that was tied into a dozen braids. It was the newly promoted Great Devil Saint, Wuxia. The two of them rushed to the bottom of the altar with murderous intent, and before they could see Ji Tianqing's appearance, they shouted angrily. "Bastard! How dare you break into the underground palace? Are you tired of living? Bastard of the human race, today I will tear you into pieces and burn your bones to ashes." As they spoke, Batua and Wuxia took out their swords and sabers, and their bodies emitted a strong murderous intent. The surging black fog and demonic chi spread out in all directions, shrouding the entire hall. Ji Tianqing stood at the top of the altar and looked down at Batua with a mocking sneer. "Batua! Your time of death has come." Abruptly, Batua's body shook when he heard this. He finally saw Ji Tianqing's appearance clearly, and his face changed immediately, revealing an extremely frightened look. You! You are Ji Tianqing. Wu Su also frowned, and his expression became extremely solemn. He stared at Ji Tianqing sharply. Although he had just become a great devil saint 2 years ago, and had not fought with Ji Tianqing before. However, the name Ji Tianqing was like thunder to his ears, and even Wu Su was fearful of him. Ji Tianqing looked down at Ba Tuo and sneered, "Before you die, I will give you 10 breaths of time. You can send a message to the ancestor great devil god. Tell him that Ji Tianqing is here, and ask him to kneel down and accept his death." Such arrogant and overbearing words filled Ma Tuo and Wu Su with indignation and humiliation. Wu Su gritted his teeth in anger, and shouted coldly, "Ji Tianqing, you are too arrogant. Just you. You are not qualified for the ancestor to take action." As he spoke, Wu Su held his pitch-black saber with both hands, and pounced at Ji Tianqing without any regard for his own safety. Heavenly Devil Domineering Saber. Wu Su roared, and his pitch-black saber emitted a black radiance that was 100 feet long. It condensed into a deathly saber radiance, and slashed at Ji Tianqing. However, Ji Tianqing did not take him seriously at all. He did not even use the burial of heaven, and simply pointed his finger. Heaven-piercing finger. He put his right index and middle fingers together, forming a sword finger, and emitted a sacred white light. Kacha. With a crisp sound, the 100 feet long blazing white sword radiance shattered the 100 feet long deathly saber radiance. The deathly saber radiance turned into black fragments that covered the sky, and scattered in the night sky like a rainstorm. That 30-meter-long sacred sword gleam did not weaken in the slightest as it ruthlessly stabbed Wu Su. Bam! With a dull sound, the sacred sword radiance pierced through Wu Su's chest, destroying his organs. Then, Wu Su's physical body shattered like a mirror, exploding into pieces that filled the sky. Not only was his body destroyed, his soul was also destroyed, and shattered into dozens of pieces. A second-degree devil saint was turned into ashes, and his bones were shattered into pieces. He could not even block Ji Tianqing's casual move. Seeing this scene with his own eyes, Ma Tuo was so scared that his face changed dramatically, and his eyes flashed with deep fear. He no longer had any intention to fight, and turned to escape without hesitation. Swoosh! A black radiance flashed, and Ba Tuo's figure disappeared into the darkness. The next moment, he escaped from the underground palace, and appeared in the sky above the city lord's residence. Chapter 2439. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, Ji Tianqing appeared in the night and blocked Ba Tuo's path. The night was as dark as ink and a cold wind blew. Ba Tuo's heart was filled with fear and panic. When he saw Ji Tianqing appear, he turned around and ran in another direction without hesitation. As for attacking Ji Tianqing, he did not even dare to think about it. Not to mention him, even the great devil Saint Ling Xian was not Ji Tianqing's match. Only the ancestor demon god had the confidence to kill Ji Tianqing. If he dared to attack Ji Tianqing, he would die here tonight. In order to escape Star Moon City and shake off Ji Tianqing's pursuit, he did not hesitate to use the blood escape secret skill. Swoosh! With a flash of red light, Ba Tuo disappeared into thin air and was about to escape into another space. In the next moment, he was about to teleport 300 miles away and escape Star Moon City. However, something that Ba Tuo did not expect happened. Kacha! Ji Tianqing formed a seal with both hands and his palms emitted a holy white light as he grabbed at the night sky in front of him. The night sky in a 10-mile radius was shattered and the space was in chaos. Without a doubt, Ba Tuo's teleportation had been interrupted. He was forcefully squeezed out by the power of the space and rolled into the city governor's mansion. A huge hole was smashed into the majestic and dignified palace, and countless pieces of earth and stone flew everywhere. Ba Tuo was injured and blood flowed out of his mouth and nose as he panted heavily. However, the injuries and pain on his body could not suppress the fear in his heart. Oh my God! Ji Tianqing, this bastard! He actually broke the space and interrupted my blood escape secret skill. How did he do it? Has he broken through the martial sage realm and reached the divine realm? Ba Tuo knew that a martial sage realm elite could not do it so easily. Only an unparalleled martial god could do it. At this thought, Ba Tuo was even more terrified and desperate. Just as Ba Tuo's mind was racing and he was inwardly shocked, a giant palm of white light that blotted out the sun slammed down from the sky. The mountain-sized palm was condensed from holy white light and contained an indestructible and purifying power. Boom! Just as Ba Tuo was about to rush out of the ruins, he was hit by the giant divine palm. The unstoppable divine power instantly destroyed the entire city lord's mansion, turning hundreds of houses and palaces into ruins. A 1,000-meter-deep crater was left on the spot, with a radius of several tens of miles. Garrisoned in the city lord's mansion were over 30 demon generals, over 1,000 elite guards, and over 100 scouts and messengers. However, 90% of them were killed by Ji Tianqing's palm. Only a few demon generals and a few dozen demon guards were left, and they were lying in the ruins with heavy injuries, screaming in pain. Ba Tuo was also heavily injured. His entire body was covered in blood as he lay at the bottom of the pit, covered in dust and sand. All the bones in his body were broken and shattered. His internal organs and meridians were also shattered. His strength was extremely weak. With such heavy injuries, he knew that he would not be able to escape tonight. Therefore, he ignored his injuries and hurriedly took out a communication jade slip and sent it to the ancestral fiend celestial. Whoosh! When the jade slip turned into a beam of bloody light and shot into the night sky, Ba Tuo finally let out a sigh of relief. He hurriedly took out a talisman, wanting to use this sacred grade space escape talisman to escape Xingyue City. Swoosh! When he injected his magic power into the talisman immediately ignited with bloody fire, bursting with powerful spatial power. However, before the spatial power could envelop Ba Tuo, a 1,000-meter-tall holy sword slashed down from the sky. The 1,000-meter-tall blazing white sword was dazzling with divine power, containing the most sacred power. Kaboom! Ba Tuo could not dodge in time and was struck by the huge sword. His body exploded into pieces. Even his soul was turned to dust by the huge sword and scattered in the crater. After Ba Tuo was killed, his body ignited with bloody fire and turned into ashes. Demonic chi rose into the air and covered the sky. However, the white light from the huge holy sword quickly dispersed the demonic chi. Ba Tuo was also dead. Although he had the strength of a rank 6 martial sage, he was one of the best among the martial sages. However, in front of Ji Tianqing, he was still weak and could only be killed in an instant. After a while, the earth-shattering explosion dissipated. The entire Xingyue city descended into chaos. Countless demon race soldiers and demonized citizens ran around in panic, letting out fearful and angry roars. A large number of soldiers and guards rushed towards the city lord mansion to check on the situation. Many demon generals and experts rushed to Ji Tianqing without any regard for their own safety, besieging him. Ji Tianqing stood expressionlessly in the night sky. He waved the burial of heaven sword and slashed out sword radiance. He waved his palm and shot out divine light that covered the sky. All kinds of divine abilities and supreme sword techniques poured into the city like a flood, wantonly slaughtering the demon race army. Wherever the holy white light shrouded, all the demons were reduced to dust and ashes. Ji Tianqing faced the hundreds of thousands of demon race soldiers alone but did not retreat at all. He was like a god that ruled over all life. With a flick of his finger, he could kill thousands of demon race soldiers. However, the attacks of the demon race soldiers could not even break through the protective holy light around him. This was a massacre with a great disparity in strength. Ji Tianxing used a full 4 hours to exterminate the 600,000-strong devil army. He only killed over 500,000 of them. The remaining tens of thousands of demon race soldiers were scared out of their wits and fled in all directions. The demon generals of the entire army were all killed by him. Only 2 or 3 of them were lucky enough to survive. Even among the 400,000 demonized citizens, 100,000 of them had died in the battle. After the battle subsided, Ji Tianxing used the Shentian demon suppression art and released an earth-shattering holy shockwave that enveloped the entire city. Without exception, all the demonized citizens trapped in the city fainted from the shockwave. Most of the demon qi in their bodies dissipated. Ji Tianxing used another 4 hours to purify all the citizens with the help of the heaven-mending orb. Although Yunyao had once reminded him that there was not much point in doing so. After the citizens were purified, they would also become homeless refugees. Most of them would wander around and be slaughtered by the demon race or demonized again. However, Ji Tianxing thought that even if only a few tens of thousands of citizens could survive in the end, it would be worth it. After dealing with this matter, he did not stay any longer. He left Xingyue city as fast as lightning. After a short 2 hours, he returned to Taiyuan city. When he entered the city lord's mansion, the 7th god's child was pacing back and forth in the study. He looked anxious and worried. When he saw Ji Tianxing return, he was immediately energized and hurried to greet him. "Young Master Ji. You're back so soon. Have you found Jiujiu? How's the situation in Xingyue city?" Ji Tianxing nodded and said calmly, "Jiujiu and the 4th god's child have been rescued by him. In addition, the 2 demon saints stationed in Xingyue city and the 600,000 demon race soldiers were also destroyed by me." Chapter 2440. At that moment, the 7th prince almost thought he had misheard. He couldn't believe that Ji Tianxing had accomplished so many feats in such a short time. Not only did he break into Xingyue city and rescue Jiujiu and the 4th prince. He also killed 2 demon saints and slaughtered 600,000 demon soldiers. That was too terrifying. The 7th prince believed that only an overlord like his father could create such a miracle. Ji Tianxing didn't say much. He opened the sword world and released Jiujiu and the 4th prince. Whoosh! Whoosh! A white light flashed, and Jiujiu and the 4th prince appeared in the study. Both of them wore ragged clothes, and their bodies were covered in blood and wounds. They seemed to be in a sorry and miserable state. Fortunately, they had rested for a few hours in the sword world and recovered a little. They also treated most of their wounds. Otherwise, their injuries would be even more miserable and unbearable to look straight at. The 7th prince heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Jiujiu and the 4th prince, but he was also filled with pity and anger. He was glad that Ji Tianxing had saved Jiujiu and the 4th god's child from the devil's nest. However, the 2 of them had suffered such serious injuries and looked so miserable. He was extremely angry and hated the demon race to the extreme. The 3 siblings were very excited and relieved to be reunited. The 7th god's son pulled the 2 of them aside and inquired about their situation. Ji Tianxing didn't stay any longer and left quietly. He returned to his residence and meditated for a few hours. The next morning, he left Taiyuan city with Yunyao. Saving Jiujiu and the 4th prince was just a small interlude. He didn't forget that he had come to the vast divine nation to seek revenge from the ancestor fiend celestial. He still had to kill more demon generals and soldiers to force the ancestor fiend celestial to show up. For the next half a month, Ji Tianxing had been wandering around the battlefront. Wherever there was a devil race legion, where devil race experts and generals were stationed, that would be his target. His plan to kill the leader was no longer a conspiracy. It had become an open one. With their unparalleled strength, he and Yunyao did not need to hide. They directly charged into the demon camp. After killing the experts and generals of the devil race, they still had to slaughter a large number of the devil army. If the ancestral fiend god did not show himself, no one could stop his massacre. In just a dozen days, Ji Tianqing and his wife had destroyed 8 demon camps and 6 demon legions, totaling over 2 million demon soldiers. Among them were more than 300 demon generals, more than 200 blood gods, and a new demon saint. This was the 4th devil saint that Ji Tianqing had killed. Of the 5 devil saints under the ancestral devil god, only the great devil saint Ling Xian was still alive. In addition, Ji Tianqing had saved more than 1 million demonized humans. Such a heavy blow caused the demons to suffer disastrous losses and their morale to plummet. For a time, the demon army was in a state of panic. More than a dozen legions withdrew their defenses and retreated to the north. The demons' southward advance was halted, and their plan to completely occupy the boundless divine kingdom was foiled. Such outstanding results made the 7 Shensi and many human generals cry out in disbelief. The morale of the human army was also high, and they were ready to fight. They swore to protect the territory of the boundless divine kingdom. During this time, Ji Tianqing met with the 7 Shensi again. He asked the 7 Shensi to help him collect and investigate information about the God Orb. The 7 Shensi certainly did not refuse and would do his best to complete the task. Ji Tianqing and his wife rested in Taiyuan City for a day before embarking on their journey again to continue the execution of the plan. This time, his target was the Heavenly Cloud City, which was 200,000 miles north of Taiyuan City. That was the capital of the Outcloud Empire. When Ji Tianqing had first entered the Shenwu continent, he had participated in the God Disciple selection in the Heavenly Cloud City. He had entered Mount Godseal as the top genius of the Outcloud Empire. He was not unfamiliar with that city. Late at night, the sky was dark and moonless. Ji Tianqing and Yunyao were flying high in the sky on the fiery glass dragon. The fiery glass dragon had been flying for 12 hours, and they would arrive at the Heavenly Cloud City in another hour at most. Ji Tianqing looked calmly at the night sky in front of him and said to Yunyao, "I killed many demon generals before and used a secret soul-searching technique to obtain some information. After the demon army occupied the Heavenly Cloud City, they used it as their headquarters for their southern expedition. They stored a large number of soldiers and resources. It is said that the great demon Saint Ling Xian is in the Heavenly Cloud City and has the most powerful army under his command. There are millions of demons. In the past half a month, a large number of demons have retreated to the north. Some of them must have retreated to the vicinity of the Heavenly Cloud City." After listening to his words, Yunyao nodded and said in a serious tone, "So, the number of demons in the Heavenly Cloud City is far more than 1 million? If we kill the great demon Saint Ling Xian tonight and wipe out the rest of the demon army, half of the demon army will be wiped out. What's more, with the first demon god's demon saints dead, there will be no generals to command. The army will collapse without a fight." Ji Tianqing nodded and said in a solemn voice, "Correct. So long as our plan succeeds, the demon army will be defeated. With no generals to command, the first demon god will be defeated and forced to return to Dark North Mountain. But if we can think of this, so can the first demon god. So, I am 80% sure that the first demon god will appear tonight to stop us." Yunyao frowned and muttered in a low voice, "That is possible. But we have been fighting for so long and the first demon god has not shown himself. Before Buddha died, he sent a message to the first demon god, but there was no response. I have a feeling the first demon god is up to something. We have to be careful." Ji Tianqing's lips curled into a smile and he nodded. "Of course we have to be careful. But right now we are the ones slaughtering the demon army and forcing the first demon god to show himself. No matter what the first demon god is up to, so long as he shows himself, I will not let him go." Time passed as the two of them talked. Half an hour later, the dragon reached the outskirts of Skycloud City. It hovered over a mountain range. Ji Tianqing and Yun Yao stood on the dragon's back, looking out at the city 300 kilometers away. Their eyes were cold and sharp. Skycloud City at night was shrouded in a black fog. It was eerie and deathly still. Faint crimson lights flickered through the fog and demonic energy. Ji Tianqing released his divine sense and quickly saw the situation in the city. All of Skycloud was covered by a saint-grade array. The city gates were closed and a large number of demon warriors stood guard on the city walls. It was under martial law. Many of the city's buildings had been converted into demon barracks. Other than that, there was nothing out of the ordinary. Let's go. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and motioned for the dragon to fly forward and enter the city. Yun Yao remained silent, looking as if she was deep in thought. Suddenly she frowned and said in a serious voice, "Wait. Tianqing, I have a bad feeling about this." Chapter 24-41. Although Ji Tianqing's divine power had a great restraining effect on demonic power, Ji Tianqing's divine power had a great restraining effect. He was the demon's nemesis. However, Yun Yao was more sensitive to demonic energy and demonic aura. Since she had a bad feeling, it was proof that something was wrong with Skycloud. Ji Tianqing hurriedly stopped and said with a solemn expression, "All right, I'll use my divine sense to check again." Yun Yao nodded. Silently she unsheathed her twin swords and stood guard at his side. Ji Tianqing released his formless divine sense, which spread out like quicksilver, enveloping the entire city in a careful examination. All of the buildings, streets, and alleys in the city within a radius of 150 kilometers were reflected in his mind. Where the guards were hidden, where the army was stationed, where the traps and ambushes were laid out, it was all clear to him. Even the imperial palace, which was heavily guarded and had the strongest defense, could not block the probing of his divine sense. It didn't take long for him to discover that there were hundreds of demonic generals and tens of thousands of elite guards. In the depths of the palace there was also the aura of a demon saint. He was no stranger to it. It was the great demon saint, Ling Xian. Half an hour later, Ji Tianqing had learned everything about the city. Only then did he withdraw his consciousness. He turned to look at Yun Yao with a puzzled expression. "I've already scanned the city. There's nothing out of the ordinary. Ling Xian is overseeing the city. He has an army of 1,300,000 demonic soldiers under his command, as well as 700,000 demonized civilians. The number of blood gods and generals has reached 300 as well. It's an impregnable stronghold, filled with experts." Yun Yao frowned and asked worriedly, "Did you not detect the aura of the ancestral devil god? Or is there an ambush in the city?" Ji Tianqing shook his head. Yun Yao hesitated. After a moment she spoke in a serious voice. "Tianqing, we're already in Skycloud. There's no need to rush. Let's wait outside for a few hours. It won't be too late for us to enter the city at dawn." Ji Tianqing did not care if there was an ambush in the city. The reason he carried out the beheading plan was to force the ancestral fiend god to show himself. If the ancestral devil god was in the city, that would be exactly what he wanted. However, Yun Yao insisted on acting cautiously. He would not act rashly, so he nodded and agreed. "All right, then we'll do as you say. We'll observe for a few hours." Then, Yun Yao put away the glazed fire dragon. She and Ji Tianqing retracted their auras and used the invisibility technique to escape into the darkness. The two of them hid outside the city walls, blending in with the darkness as they watched. Time passed silently as the two of them waited patiently. Skycloud was as calm as ever, with nothing out of the ordinary. Unknowingly, 4 hours had passed. Dawn was coming, and the sky was about to brighten. Yun Yao's brows furrowed as she thought to herself. There's been no movement in the city, nothing out of the ordinary. Am I overthinking things? Too nervous? At this moment, a spiritual light suddenly lit up in the night sky behind the two of them. Whoosh! The white light cut through the night sky and flew to Ji Tianqing in an instant, falling into his palm. In this way, his and Yunyao's location was exposed. If there were experts secretly watching, they would have discovered this situation. Ji Tianqing lowered his head to take a look and saw that there was a communication jade slip in his palm. Judging from the mark, it was from the seventh god Sun. He injected his divine sense into the jade slip, and the seventh god Sun's voice immediately sounded in his mind. Mr. Ji, I have good news for you. Tonight, the father has finally completed his cultivation and has come out of seclusion. I have already informed the father of what happened before, as well as your plan. The father is very happy to hear the news. He will personally come to Taiyuan City to thank you in person and discuss the plan to eliminate the demons. The seventh god Sun's tone was quite excited, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders, but also full of anticipation. It seemed that he believed that if martial god Taihao and Ji Tianqing worked together, they would definitely be able to defeat the demons and kill the ancestor demon god. Ji Tianqing put away the jade slip, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. Yunyao looked at him with concern and quickly asked, Tianqing, is this a message from the seventh god Sun? What happened? Ji Tianqing nodded and said with a smile, the seventh god Sun sent me a message saying that martial god Taihao has finally completed his cultivation and has successfully come out of seclusion. Martial god Taihao knows that I'm assassinating the demons, so he wants to meet me in Taiyuan City to thank me in person and discuss the plan to eliminate the demons. Hearing this, Yunyao was immediately energized. She quickly nodded and said, that's great. We don't have to fight alone anymore. With the help of martial god Taihao, we will definitely be able to kill the ancestor demon god and make sure that the demons will never return. As soon as Yunyao finished speaking, a dark red light suddenly appeared in the night sky not far away. Swoosh! The red light tore through the night sky and a huge gap appeared. A burly figure, 20 feet tall and shrouded in a black robe, stepped out of the gap in the void. The black-robed figure was surrounded by demonic energy and emitted a cold aura of death. It had 3 large heads, 4 thick arms, and 6 pairs of blade-like black wings on its back. There was no doubt that it was the ancestor demon god, who had shrunk 1,000 times. Ha ha ha. You bitch, how arrogant of you. I'd like to see who's the one who won't return tonight. The ancestor demon god's body stood proudly in the night sky. Its eyes were fixed on Ji Tianqing and Yunyao's hiding place, and it sneered in a mocking tone. A muffled sound like thunder broke the silence of the night sky. At the same time, thousands of lights lit up in the silent heavenly cloud city. Tens of thousands of demon warriors rushed out of the city like a tide toward Ji Tianqing and Yunyao. Ji Tianqing and Yunyao immediately understood what was going on. Clearly, the ancestor demon god had arrived in Heavenly Cloud City a long time ago, but had been hiding in a different dimension. The seemingly calm Heavenly Cloud City had been prepared for an ambush, ready to strike at any moment. Ji Tianqing turned his head and looked at Yunyao beside him. He nodded at her with a look of approval. Yunyao nodded and looked at the ancestor demon god with serious eyes. Her hands clenched around her twin swords. Now that their invisibility had been seen through, the two of them decided to stop hiding and reveal themselves in the night sky. Ji Tianqing looked at the ancestor demon god with sharp eyes and said in a cold voice, Ancestor demon god, in the past month I've killed nearly 3 million demons. Among them were hundreds of blood gods and generals, as well as 4 demon saints. You've suffered such heavy losses, yet you've been hiding, not daring to show your face. You've set up a trap in Heavenly Cloud City, waiting for me to walk right into it. You didn't dare to show yourself until I entered the city. When you heard that Taihao had come out of seclusion and that I was going to join forces with him, you jumped out. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.